In the fog-choked village of St. Aldwines, a cryptic letter lures Hercule Poirot to a manor steeped in secrets. A man lies dead in a locked room, a cursed sapphire brooch vanishes, and whispers of betrayal haunt Blackthorn Manor. Who sent the anonymous plea? What darkness hides in the Langley family's past? From hidden passages to coded diaries, poisoned chalices to masked intruders, Poirot unravels a web of greed and murder. Will he expose the traitor before the shadows claim another life? Dive into a tale of deception where every clue sparks a question, and only Poirot's little gray cells can find the truth. Chapter 1. The whisper in the fog. Fog clung to the village of St. Aldwines like a conspirator, thick and conspiratorial, muffling the clatter of hooves and the creak of carriage wheels as Hercule Poirot's hired trap rolled into the heart of the hamlet. It was late October, and the air carried a damp chill that seeped through his meticulously pressed overcoat. Poirot, ever the fastidious Belgian, adjusted his scarf, his gloved fingers brushing the brim of his hat as he peered into the swirling mist. The village, nestled in the Cotswolds, was a postcard of English quaintness: stone cottages with ivy-clad walls, a church spire piercing the fog, but tonight it seemed to hold its breath, as if guarding a secret. Poirot's journey had begun 2 days prior in London, prompted by a peculiar missive slipped under his door at his flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The letter, penned in a hurried, elegant hand, bore no signature, only a plea: come to St. Aldwines at once. A crime is afoot, one you alone can prevent. Trust no one. The envelope, postmarked from the village, was sealed with a crimson wax stamp, its emblem a curious entwining of a serpent and a rose. Poirot, never one to resist the lure of a mystery, had packed his valise, informed his valet of a brief absence, and boarded the first train to the countryside. Now, as the carriage rattled to a stop outside the Rusty Anchor, the village's sole inn, he felt the familiar stir of his little gray cells awakening. The inn's sign creaked in the wind, its faded anchor barely discernible through the fog. Poirot stepped down, his polished shoes clicking on the cobblestones, and handed the driver a crisp note. Merci, monsieur. Keep the change, but do not linger. The night is not kind. The driver, a grizzled man with a face like weathered oak, nodded silently and urged his horse onward, vanishing into the mist. Inside, the Rusty Anchor was a haven of warmth and flickering light. A fire roared in the hearth, casting shadows on the low-beamed ceiling. The patrons, a smattering of locals nursing pints of ale, glanced up as Poirot entered, their eyes lingering on his immaculate mustache and foreign air. He approached the bar, where a stout innkeeper with a florid face polished a glass with a rag that had seen better days. Bonsoir, monsieur, Poirot said, his voice precise and accented. I am Hercule Poirot, and I require a room for the night, the best you have. S'il vous plaît. The innkeeper, whose nameplate read Josiah Grimsby, raised a bushy eyebrow. A foreigner, eh? We don't get many of your sort in St. Aldwines. Got a room, though upstairs, end of the hall. Cleanest we've got. Supper's extra. Mind, Poirot inclined his head. Most satisfactory, and perhaps you can assist me further. I seek information about a letter sent from this village. It bore a seal, a serpent, and a rose. Do you know of such a thing? Grimsby's hand paused mid-polish, his eyes narrowing. Serpent and rose, you say? That's the Langley crest, up at Blackthorn Manor. Old family, they are, but not much loved round here. Keep to themselves, mostly. You do well to steer clear. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of intrigue. And yet, I am summoned. Tell me, who in this village might send such a letter, anonymously? Grimsby leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Could be anyone. Sir, the Langleys have their secrets, and folks here don't take kindly to their airs. But if you're poking about, mind the fog. Things go missing in it, people, too. Before Poirot could press further, a commotion at a corner table drew his attention. 2 men, their voices slurred with drink, were arguing over a game of cards. One, A wiry fellow with a scar across his cheek slammed his fist on the table. You cheated, Tom. That heirloom's mine by rights. The other, a burly man with a blacksmith's shoulders, laughed harshly. Heirloom, that old trinket. It's cursed, Ned, and you know it. Let the Langleys rot with their baubles. Poirot's ears pricked at the mention of an heirloom. He approached the table, his demeanor disarming. Messieurs, pardon the intrusion. I could not help but overhear. This heirloom you speak of, it is of some importance. Nong, the scarred man. Ned eyed him suspiciously. Who are you, then? Some toff come to meddle. I am Hercule Poirot, a detective of some repute. I am interested in matters of significance. Tell me of this heirloom. Tom, the blacksmith, snorted. It's a sapphire brooch, big as a pigeon's egg. Belonged to old Lady Langley. Went missing years back. Same time her son disappeared. Folks say it's hidden somewhere in Blackthorn Manor, but no one's daft enough to go looking. Ned leaned forward, his voice low. They say it's cursed, Mister, brings death to whoever holds it. And now, with old man Langley dead, the vultures are circling for what's left. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Old man Langley, you say, he is recently deceased. Eh, Tom said, draining his pint. Found dead in his study, door locked, from the inside. Heart gave out, they reckon, but I say there's more to it. Always is with that lot. The conversation was cut short by a piercing scream from outside. The patrons froze, glasses halfway to lips. Poirot, ever alert, was the first to the door, flinging it open to reveal the fog-laden street. The scream came again, fainter now, from the direction of the churchyard. Without hesitation, he stepped into the mist, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the cobblestones. The churchyard was a maze of crooked tombstones, their inscriptions blurred by time and weather. The fog was thicker here, curling around the yew trees like ghostly fingers. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the shadows, catching a flicker of movement near the church's ivy-covered wall. He approached cautiously, his hand tightening on his cane. There, slumped against a gravestone, was a man, or what remained of him. His throat was slashed, the blood stark against his pale skin, and his eyes stared blankly into the fog. Poirot knelt, noting the man's fine clothes, now stained, and a crumpled letter clutched in his hand. The seal was unmistakable, a serpent, entwined with a rose. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his mind racing. The letter was identical to the one he had received, but this one bore a single line. The truth lies in the shadows of Blackthorn. He slipped it into his pocket, his gaze sweeping the scene. The ground was soft from recent rain, yet there were no footprints save his own. The killer had been meticulous. A rustle in the bushes made him turn, but it was only a cat, its eyes glowing like twin moons. Poirot straightened, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. The dead man was likely the author of his summons, and his death suggested a plot far deeper than a missing heirloom. Blackthorn Manor loomed in his thoughts, its secrets beckoning. He returned to the inn, where the patrons had resumed their chatter, though the air was heavier now. Grimsby met his gaze as he re-entered. Found trouble already, have you? Poirot's smile was tight. Trouble, monsieur, has found me. I will take that room now, and tomorrow I shall visit Blackthorn Manor. There is much to uncover. As he ascended the creaking stairs, the fog pressed against the inn's windows, a silent witness to the night's grim discovery. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with anticipation. The game was afoot, and in St. Aldwain's, every shadow held a clue. He would unravel this mystery, step by meticulous step, until the truth emerged from the fog. The night passed fitfully, with the wind howling outside and the inn's timbers groaning like a restless spirit. Poirot rose early, his mind sharp despite the late hour of his discovery. He breakfasted on tea and toast, declining the inn's greasy sausages with a polite grimace, and studied the letter from the dead man. The handwriting matched his own summons, confirming his suspicion. The man, whoever he was, had known of a danger at Blackthorn Manor and had paid the ultimate price for it. By mid-morning, Poirot set out for the manor, a mile's walk along a winding lane. The fog had thinned, revealing rolling hills and hedgerows, but the air remained heavy with unease. Blackthorn Manor emerged from the mist like a Gothic spectre, its stone facade weathered but imposing, its windows dark and uninviting. Ivy clung to the walls, and the iron gates creaked as Poirot pushed them open. A butler, gaunt and gray as the stone itself, greeted him at the door. "Mr. Poirot, I presume. The family is expecting you." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Expecting me? I sent no word of my arrival." The butler's expression was unreadable. "A message arrived this morning, sir, announcing your visit." From an anonymous source, Poirot's mustache twitched. Someone was orchestrating this affair with unsettling precision. He followed the butler into a grand hall, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Langleys. The air smelled of wax and old secrets, and the silence was broken only by the distant tick of a grandfather clock. In the drawing-room, he was introduced to the Langley heirs. Eleanor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, her auburn hair pinned tightly. Victor, her brother, whose charming smile belied a restless energy. And Beatrice, their cousin, a pale beauty with haunted eyes. They sat stiffly, their grief for their father tempered by an undercurrent of suspicion. "Mr. Poirot," Eleanor sobbed, her voice crisp, "we were told you are a detective." "Why are you here?" Poirot folded his hands over his cane. "I was summoned, mademoiselle, by a letter warning of a crime. Last night, I found a man dead in the churchyard, bearing a similar letter. I believe he was connected to your family." A gasp escaped Beatrice, quickly stifled. Victor's smile faltered, and Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Dead," she said. "Who was he?" "That," Poirot replied, "is what I intend to discover. Tell me, what do you know of a sapphire brooch, an heirloom of your family?" The room grew colder. Victor laughed nervously. "That old thing. It's been lost 4 years. Just a story to scare the servants." Beatrice's fingers tightened. "On her shawl, it's more than a story, Victor. It was Mother's, and it meant everything to her." Eleanor stood abruptly. "Enough, Mr. Poirot. Our father died of natural causes. There's no mystery here." "You're wasting your time." Poirot's gaze was steady. "I think not, mademoiselle. The dead man in the churchyard would disagree, were he able to speak. I will investigate, with or without your cooperation." As he left the drawing-room, Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. The anonymous letter, the Langley crest, the cursed brooch, and a locked-room death. The fog might have lifted outside, but within Blackthorn Manor, it was thicker than ever. He resolved to explore the estate, starting with the study where old man Langley had died. There, he was certain, the first thread of this tangled web awaited. The chapter closed with Poirot standing at the study door, his hand on the knob, the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. The truth, he knew, was hidden in the shadows, and he would bring it to light, no matter how deep the darkness. Chapter 2. The shadowed manor. The fog that clung to St. Aldwyn's had not relented by morning, its tendrils curling around the gabled roofs and ancient oaks like a jealous lover refusing to let go. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his polished shoes and tailored overcoat, stepped from the inn onto the cobbled street, his cane tapping a rhythm against the damp stones. The village, with its quaint charm, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the dark undercurrents the detective had come to unravel. The anonymous letter, now folded neatly in his pocket, had promised a crime, and the discovery of its author's body, Mr. Reginald Thorne, a reclusive solicitor, confirmed its weight. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with purpose as he set his sights on Blackthorn Manor, the heart of the mystery. The manor loomed at the edge of the village, its Gothic silhouette cutting through the mist like a blade. Its ivy-clad walls and towering chimney spoke of old wealth, but the chipped gargoyles and sagging shutters hinted at neglect. Poirot approached the iron gates, where a weathered crest to ravens flanking a thorned rose proclaimed the Langley family's dominion. He tugged the bell pull, and a hollow clang echoed within. Moments later, a stooped butler, his face as lined as the manor's stonework, appeared. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot," the detective announced, tipping his hat. "I am expected." The butler, who introduced himself as Graves, led Poirot through a courtyard choked with weeds to the manor's heavy oak doors. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and faded grandeur. A chandelier, its crystals dulled by dust, hung above a grand staircase that spiraled into shadow. Graves ushered Poirot into a drawing room where the Langley family awaited, their faces a study in guarded civility. Eleanor Langley, the eldest sibling, stood by a roaring fireplace, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her posture rigid as if bracing for battle. Her brother, Victor, lounged in a velvet armchair, a glass of amber liquid dangling from his fingers despite the early hour. Their cousin, Beatrice, perched on a settee, her delicate features marred by a nervous twitch at the corner of her mouth. The room was a tapestry of tension, each thread pulling against the others. "Mr. Poirot," Eleanor said, her voice crisp as frost, "we were informed of your arrival. This business with poor Mr. Thorne is dreadful, but I fail to see why it concerns us." Poirot's mustache twitched, a prelude to his disarming smile. "Mademoiselle, when a man is found dead in a locked room, and his last act is to summon Hercule Poirot, it concerns everyone in his orbit. I am here to uncover the truth, and Blackthorn Manor, I suspect, holds many truths." Victor snorted, swirling his drink. "Theatrics, Mr. Poirot. Thorne was a meddling old fool, poking into family matters that didn't concern him. Likely got himself killed for it, Victor." Beatrice's voice was sharp, her hands twisting the lace of her dress. "How can you speak so callously?" "Enough, both of you," Eleanor snapped, her eyes flashing. "Mr. Poirot, we are a private family. We've had our share of troubles, but murder, that's absurd." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes darting between them. "Privacy, Mademoiselle Langley, is often the veil behind which secrets hide. I would like to ask a few questions, if I may." The interview that followed was a delicate dance. Eleanor spoke of the family's history. Their grandfather, Lord Edmund Langley, had amassed a fortune through shipping, but his death a decade prior had sparked disputes over the inheritance. The estate was to be divided equally between Eleanor and Victor, with Beatrice, as a cousin, entitled to a smaller share. Yet, documents were missing, and Thorne, the family solicitor, had been tasked with resolving the matter. His death, Eleanor insisted, was unrelated, a tragic coincidence. Victor, less restrained, painted Thorne as an opportunist, hinting that the solicitor had been digging into matters best left buried. He was always skulking about, asking questions. "About grandfather's will," Victor said, his tone laced with disdain. "If you ask me, he crossed someone with less patience than us." Double quotes Beatrice, when pressed, admitted to knowing Thorne only in passing. "He was kind," she said softly, her eyes downcast. "He brought me books sometimes, from his library. He said they reminded him of my mother." Her voice faltered, and Poirot noted the flicker of grief in her expression. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. Graves entered, his face paler than before. "Sir, madam, there's been an incident in the library." Poirot's senses sharpened. "An incident, Monsieur Graves. Lead the way." The library was a cavernous room, its walls lined with leather-bound tomes and portraits of stern-faced Langleys. A massive oak bookshelf dominated one wall, its shelves sagging under the weight of history. But it was the floor that drew Poirot's attention. A section of the rug had been pulled back, revealing a trap door, its edges splintered as if recently forced open. "Who discovered this?" Poirot asked, kneeling to inspect the trap door. "I did, sir," Graves said, wringing his hands. "I was dusting the shelves when I noticed the rug was askew. I pulled it back and found this." Poirot's fingers traced the trapdoor's hinges, noting their lack of rust. "This has been used recently, n'est-ce pas? And yet, you, Monsieur Graves, claim to have only just found it? Graves stammered, his eyes darting to Eleanor, who had followed with Victor and Beatrice. I swear, sir, I've never seen it before. This house is old, full of oddities, Poirot stood, brushing his hands. Oddities? Yes, but this is no accident. Someone wished this passage to remain hidden, and yet, someone else wished it found. He turned to the Langleys. Who among you has explored this manor's secrets? Eleanor's lips tightened. If you're suggesting we're hiding something, Mr. Poirot, you're mistaken. This house has stood for centuries. Trapdoors and passages are hardly surprising. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone mild but his eyes sharp. But a trapdoor revealed the day after a murder. That, mademoiselle, is most suggestive. Victor laughed, a harsh sound. You think one of us crawled through a dusty passage to Kilthorne? Ridiculous. He was in the village, not here. Poirot's gaze lingered on Victor, noting the faint tremor in his hand as he raised his glass. The location of a crime, monsieur, is less important than its purpose, and purpose, I believe, lies within these walls. Beatrice stepped forward, her voice trembling. Mr. Poirot, please, if there's a passage, it could be dangerous. Shouldn't we call the police? Poirot smiled, a gesture both reassuring and enigmatic. The police, mademoiselle, have their methods, but they lack the finesse of Hercule Poirot. I shall investigate this passage myself, but first, I must understand the manor's layout. Monsieur Graves, you will provide a map? Yes, Graves nodded, though his reluctance was palpable. There's an old blueprint in the study. Sir, I'll fetch it. As Graves departed, Poirot paced the library, his mind a whirl of connections. The trapdoor suggested a hidden route, perhaps used to move unseen within the manor or to escape it. Thorne's death in a locked room implied planning, precision. The Langleys' guarded demeanor hinted at knowledge they dared not share, and the missing heirloom, mentioned in the overheard conversation at the inn, loomed like a specter over it all. When Graves returned with the blueprint, Poirot spread it across a table, its edges curling like ancient parchment. The manor was a labyrinth of corridors, staircases, and forgotten rooms, with annotations in faded ink noting servants' passage and wine cellar access. The trapdoor, however, was unmarked. Curious, Poirot murmured. A passage not recorded, even in a blueprint this detailed. Someone went to great lengths to conceal it. Eleanor crossed her arms. Or it was simply forgotten. This house is older than any of us. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Age, mademoiselle, does not erase intent? This passage was hidden with purpose, and I shall discover why. He descended the trapdoor's narrow steps, a lantern borrowed from Graves casting flickering shadows. The air below was damp, smelling of earth and time. The passage wound beneath the manor, its stone walls etched with faint scratches, marks of passage, perhaps, or something more sinister. After several minutes, Poirot emerged into a small chamber, its walls bare save for a single iron hook embedded in the stone. A faint glint caught his eye, a sliver of fabric, torn and caught on the hook, its color a deep burgundy. Poirot pocketed the fabric, his mind racing. The chamber connected to another passage, this one leading toward the manor's west wing, near the family's private quarters. He returned to the library, where the Langleys awaited, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Well, Victor demanded, what did you find? Poirot held up the fabric. A clue, monsieur. A small one, but significant. This was torn from someone's garment, caught in a place meant to remain secret. I wonder, who among you favors burgundy? Beatrice paled, her hand drifting to her throat. I have a burgundy shawl, but I haven't been in any passage. Of course not, Poirot said smoothly, and yet, the fabric is fresh, not faded by time. Someone has been using this passage, and recently. Eleanor's voice was icy. You're accusing us based on a scrap of cloth. This is absurd, not an accusation, mademoiselle, Poirot said. An observation, the truth, it reveals itself in layers, like an onion. And I, Hercule Poirot, shall peel them back. The day wore on, with Poirot methodically exploring the manor. He interviewed the staff, a cook who grumbled about Victor's temper, a maid who swore she'd seen a figure in the west wing at night, and a gardener who claimed the manor's grounds were cursed. Each conversation added a piece to the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. As evening fell, Poirot retired to a guest room, his mind alight with possibilities. The Langleys were hiding something, perhaps many things, the trapdoor suggested. A physical secret, but the true mystery lay in their motives. Eleanor's control, Victor's volatility, Beatrice's fear. They were threads in a tapestry Poirot was determined to unravel. Before retiring, he stood at his window, gazing at the fog-shrouded grounds. A shadow moved near the gate, a figure, cloaked, slipping into the mist. Poirot's lips curved. The game, it begins in earnest, he murmured. He resolved to map the manor's secrets, starting with the passage and its elusive purpose. The scrap of fabric, the hidden chamber, the Langleys' discord, all were clues, and Poirot was satisfied with his first. The truth, he knew, was a patient adversary, but Hercule Poirot was more patient still. Chapter 3. The vanishing footprint. Morning in St. Aldwyn's dawned with a peculiar stillness, as if the village held its breath beneath the weight of its own secrets. The fog that had cloaked the cobblestone streets the previous evening lingered, curling like a living thing around the gnarled oaks and the ivy-draped walls of Blackthorn Manor. Hercule Poirot, clad in his immaculate overcoat, stood at the edge of the manor's sprawling lawn, his sharp gray eyes fixed on a patch of damp earth near a rose trellis. There, in the soft soil, a single footprint had caught his attention the night before, a deep, deliberate mark, its edges crisp as if carved by intent. Now, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the mist, the footprint was gone, smoothed over as though it had never existed. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his mustache twitching with irritation. The earth, she does not lie, but someone wishes her to forget. He crouched, his gloved fingers hovering over the now flawless patch of ground. The soil was to even, to perfect, as if someone had taken pains to erase not just the footprint, but the very memory of its presence. This was no act of nature. This was the work of a hand guided by purpose. Poirot straightened, his mind already spinning a web of possibilities. The footprint had been near the manor's west wing, where the late Mr. Reginald Langley, the victim of the locked room murder, had been found. The anonymous letter that summoned Poirot to St. Aldwyn's had hinted at a crime yet to unfold, but Reginald's death had shifted the narrative. The footprint, discovered during Poirot's late-night inspection of the grounds, had been his first tangible clue, a man's boot, size 9, with a distinctive worn heel. Its disappearance was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at the feet of the great detective. He turned toward the manor, its gothic silhouette looming through the fog like a sentinel guarding its secrets. The Langley family, Eleanor, Victor, and their cousin Beatrice, had been less than forthcoming during yesterday's interviews. Their guarded responses, laced with half-truths, had only deepened Poirot's suspicion that the manor's walls hid more than cobwebs. But this vanishing footprint suggested an outsider, someone bold enough to tamper with evidence under the cover of night. Poirot's first stop was the groundskeeper's cottage, a squat stone building tucked behind a copse of willows. The groundskeeper, a wiry man named Thomas Grieve, was already at work, raking leaves with a vigor that seemed almost defiant. His face, withered as old leather, betrayed nothing as Poirot approached. "Bonjour, Monsieur Grieve," Poirot said, tipping his hat. "A fine morning for your labors, non?" Grieve paused, leaning on his rake. "Fine enough, sir, though this fog's a devil for the joints." His voice was gruff, but his eyes darted toward the manor. A flicker of unease Poirot did not miss. "Tell me, Monsieur Grieve, you are a man who knows the land, oui? You see all that passes on these grounds. Last night, near the west wing, I observed a footprint most curious, most distinct. Yet this morning, it is gone, poof." Poirot snapped his fingers. What do you know of this? Greaves' grip tightened on the rake. Footprint, you say? Can't say I've seen any. Ground soft after the rain. Marks come and go. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but his smile remained polite. Come and go, you say. Yet this mark was erased with care, as if by a hand that wished to hide its passage. Tell me, have you seen a stranger about the manor recently? Someone who does not belong. Grieve hesitated, his jaw working as if chewing on his words. At last, he said, there was a fellow, night before last, skulking near the gate. He was tall, dark coat, had pulled low. Didn't get a good look, fog was thick. Thought he was just a vagrant, passing through. A vagrant who lingers near a manor where murder has been done. Poirot's tone was light, but his gaze was piercing. You did not think to report this to your masters? Grieve shrugged, but the gesture was stiff. Didn't seem worth troubling them. Langleys have enough on their plates. Indeed, Poirot said, his voice soft as silk. Merci, Monsieur Grieve, you have been most illuminating. As Poirot walked back toward the manor, his mind churned. Grieve's story was plausible, but the man's unease suggested he knew more than he let on. The stranger in the dark coat intrigued Poirot, but the groundskeeper's reticence was equally telling. Was Grieve protecting someone, or merely avoiding trouble? The little gray cells, they were restless. Inside Blackthorn Manor, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old secrets. Poirot found the Langley siblings in the drawing-room, their faces a study in contrast. Eleanor, pale and composed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Victor, pacing like a caged animal, his dark eyes flashing with impatience. And Beatrice, perched on a velvet settee, her gaze distant as if lost in a private world. Monsieur Poirot, Eleanor said, rising gracefully, have you made progress in your inquiries? Poirot bowed slightly. Progress, Mademoiselle Langley, is like a dance, one step forward, one step back. But I have a question for you all. Last night, a footprint was found near the west wing, where poor Monsieur Reginald met his end. This morning, it is gone, erased. Tell me, have any of you ventured outside in the night? Victor stopped pacing, his brow furrowing. Erased. What's that supposed to mean? You think one of us was out there, mucking about in the dirt? Victor, Eleanor said sharply, mind your tone. Monsieur Poirot is only doing his job. Beatrice, silent until now, looked up, her green eyes sharp. A footprint, that's hardly evidence of anything. The rain could have washed it away. Non, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his voice firm. The rain, she fell 2 nights ago. This footprint was fresh, and its erasure was no act of nature. Someone wished it gone. I wonder why. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like dust. Victor's jaw tightened, and Eleanor's fingers twitched, but Beatrice merely shrugged, her expression unreadable. I suggest, Poirot continued, that we consider who might have reason to hide their presence. A stranger was seen near the manor 2 nights ago, a tall man, in a dark coat. Does this description stir any memories? Eleanor shook her head, but Victor's eyes flicked toward the window, a gesture so fleeting Poirot nearly missed it. Beatrice, however, leaned forward, her voice low. You think this stranger killed Uncle Reginald? But why? He had no enemies, none that we knew of. Enemies, mademoiselle, are not always known to the family, Poirot said. But let us turn to another matter. Monsieur Harrow, your guest. He claims to be a historian, studying the architecture of old manors. Yet he is curiously absent during my visits. Where is he now? He's in the village, Eleanor said quickly. Researching at the library, I believe. Most convenient, Poirot murmured. I shall seek him out, but first, I must examine the grounds once more. The earth, she may yet whisper her secrets. The village library was a modest building, its shelves crammed with dusty tomes and yellowed manuscripts. Poirot found Mr. Harrow in a corner, hunched over a ledger, his dark coat draped over a chair. The man looked up, his angular face betraying a flicker of surprise before he masked it with a smile. "Monsieur Poirot," Harrow said, rising. "I didn't expect to see you here. Are you a scholar of history as well?" "Non, monsieur," Poirot said, his tone genial but his eyes sharp. "I am a scholar of truth, and truth, she is often hidden in the shadows. Tell me, where were you last night?" "Near the west wing of Blackthorn Manor." Harrow's smile faltered. "The west wing. I was in my room, reading. I'm not one for midnight strolls." "Curious," Poirot said. "For a man who studies architecture, you seem uninterested in the manor's grounds. A footprint was found there, you see, and now it is gone. Erased, as if by one who fears discovery." Harrow's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting I tampered with evidence? That's absurd. I'm here to study, not to play games with footprints. Games, monsieur, are often played by those who have much to hide," Poirot said. "I shall keep my eye on you, Monsieur Harrow. The little gray cells, they do not rest." As Poirot left the library, a plan took shape. Harrow's defensiveness was telling, but the man's story held just enough plausibility to keep him in play. The footprint's erasure pointed to someone with access to the grounds, someone who knew the manor's rhythms. Grieve, Harrow, or one of the Langleys each was a piece in the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. That afternoon, Poirot returned to the manor, his attention drawn to the rose trellis where the footprint had been. He examined the soil. Again, noting faint traces of disturbance, a few grains of earth scattered on nearby stones, as if brushed away in haste. Nearby, a gardener's shed stood, its door slightly ajar. Inside, Poirot found a rake, its tines caked with fresh soil, the groundskeeper's tool, perhaps, but Grieve had been raking leaves that morning, not smoothing earth. A sudden rustle in the bushes made Poirot turn, his hand instinctively tightening on his cane. A figure darted from the shadows, a boy, no more than 12, with wide eyes and a dirt-streaked face. "You're that detective, ain't you?" the boy said, his voice trembling. "Oui, I am Hercule Poirot," he replied, softening his tone. "And you, young monsieur, who are you?" "Yem, sir, I work for Mr. Grieve sometimes. I saw something last night, near the manor. Didn't tell no one, 'cause I was scared." Poirot knelt to the boy's level, his eyes kind but probing. "What did you see?" "Yem, speak, and you shall have my protection." Yem swallowed hard. "It was a man, sir, not Mr. Harrow, nor any of the Langleys. He was tall, with a limp, like his leg was bad. He was by the trellis, smoothing the ground with a board. I hid in the bushes, didn't move till he was gone. A limp, you say?" Poirot's mind raced. None of the Langleys or Harrow had a limp, and Grieve's gait was steady. This man, did he wear a dark coat sir, and a scarf, wrapped high, like he didn't want to be seen? Poirot pressed a shilling into Yem's hand. "You have done well, mon petit. Say nothing of this to anyone, oui? Poirot will handle the rest." As the boy scampered off, Poirot stood, his thoughts a whirlwind, a stranger with a limp, erasing evidence in the dead of night. This was no random vagrant, but a player in a larger game. The footprint's erasure was a deliberate act, meant to obscure a trail that led. Where? To the murder, to the manor's secrets, or to something yet unknown. That evening, Poirot gathered the Langleys in the dining hall, the chandelier casting long shadows across the oak table. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "the vanishing footprint is but one thread in a tapestry of deceit. Someone among us or near us knows more than they say. I propose a simple test. Tomorrow, I shall recreate the conditions of last night. The fog, it will return, and I shall watch the grounds. If the stranger appears, he will not escape Hercule." "Poirot," Victor scoffed, "you're chasing ghosts." Poirot, "A footprint means nothing. On the contrary, Monsieur Langley," Poirot said, his eyes glinting. A footprint means everything when it is erased. It is a sign of guilt, of fear, and fear. It leads me to the truth. Beatrice shivered, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Eleanor remained silent, her gaze fixed on Poirot as if measuring his resolve. The room crackled with tension, each suspect a shadow in the fog of Poirot's mind. As the Langleys retired, Poirot lingered, his thoughts turning to the stranger with the limp. He would shadow Harrow? Yes, but he would also watch the grounds, the trellis, the shed. The little gray cells hummed with anticipation. The footprint was gone, but its absence was a clue in itself, a beacon pointing to a truth hidden just beyond the fog. The night was young, and Hercule Poirot was ready to hunt. Chapter 4. The coated dye-arrived morning mist clung to St. Aldwyn's like a conspirator, shrouding Blackthorn Manor in a veil of secrecy. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably trimmed despite the early hour, stood at the edge of the manor's gravel drive, his keen eye scanning the windows. The death of Mr. Reginald Crane, found in a locked room at the village inn, had ignited Poirot's curiosity. The anonymous letter that summoned him to this fog-draped village hinted at a crime yet to unfold, but Crane's murder suggested the plot had already thickened. Now, in the grand but brooding halls of Blackthorn Manor, Poirot sought answers. Among the Langley family's tangled web of secrets, the manor's oak-paneled library was a cavern of knowledge, its shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound tomes. Poirot had requested to examine Crane's belongings, delivered to the manor by the local constable, a nervous man named Hodges who seemed overwhelmed by the detective's presence. Among the sparse possessions a tarnished pocket watch, a worn coat, a pair of spectacles was a small, black leather diary. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols, a jumble of numbers, letters, and curious glyphs that danced like riddles under Poirot's gaze. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, tracing a finger over the inked patterns. This is no ordinary journal. It is a cipher, a puzzle begging to be solved. He settled into a high-backed chair, the diary opened before him, and began to study the entries. The symbols were methodical, repeating in patterns that suggested a substitution code. Poirot's mind, a finely tuned instrument, hummed with anticipation. A code was not merely a barrier, it was an invitation, a challenge from the dead to the living. The library door creaked open, and Eleanor Langley entered, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her expression a mix of curiosity and wariness. At 32, she carried the poise of the manor's eldest heir, but her green eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice measured, have you found something of interest? Poirot closed the diary with a deliberate snap. Mademoiselle Langley, this diary belonged to Monsieur Crane. It is filled with codes, secrets he wished to conceal. Do you know why a man such as he would keep such a record? Eleanor's fingers tightened around the lace cuff of her sleeve. Reginald was eccentric. He was a distant cousin, always poking into family history. I assumed he was writing a book or some such nonsense. Eccentric, perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes never leaving her face, but not without purpose. This diary speaks of a scarlet key. Does that phrase mean anything to you? Her lips parted, then closed. No, she said, too quickly. It sounds like one of his fanciful stories. Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching as if it could sense deception. Stories, mademoiselle, often hide truths. I shall require assistance to decipher this code. Perhaps the village has someone skilled in such matters. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Miss Clara Henshaw, the librarian at St. Aldwyn's. She's a scholar of sorts, always buried in old texts. If anyone can help, it's her. Bien, Poirot said, rising, I shall visit this Mademoiselle Henshaw. And you, mademoiselle, would do well to consider what secrets your family keeps. They may be the key to this mystery. The village library was a modest stone building, its windows glowing with the soft light of oil lamps. Clara Henshaw, a woman in her late 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually ink-stained apron, greeted Poirot with a mixture of awe and skepticism. Monsieur Poirot, she said, pushing a stray gray curl from her forehead. "I never thought to see a man of your reputation in St. Aldwyn's. What brings you to my humble shelves?" Poirot offered a courteous bow. "Mademoiselle Henshaw, I require your expertise. I have a diary filled with a code most perplexing. It belonged to a man now dead, and I believe it holds the secret to his murder." Clara's eyes gleamed with scholarly zeal. "A code? Oh, do show me." She cleared a table cluttered with manuscripts and ushered Poirot to sit. He opened the diary, revealing pages of cryptic symbols, 3x7, ZQ9, a spiral glyph, and the recurring phrase SK, circled in red ink. Clara adjusted her glasses, her fingers tracing the entries. "This is a Polybius square, I'd wager," she said. "A grid where letters are replaced by numbers or symbols. But the glyphs, they're unusual. Perhaps a personal twist on the cipher." Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. "You are familiar with such codes." "I've studied cryptography as a hobby," Clara admitted. "Old war dispatches, medieval manuscripts, they're full of such tricks. Let's assume a 5x5 grid. Excluding the letter J, as is common, the numbers likely correspond to row and column positions. Together, they constructed a grid, mapping letters to coordinates." Clara scribbled furiously, her excitement palpable. After an hour, they cracked a single entry. "Meet at dusk." SK, the reference to the Scarlet Key, appeared again, alongside a time 11 p.m. and a location. "The old Jew." "The old Jew," Clara mused. "There's a massive yew tree in the churchyard. Centuries old. Village lore says it's haunted." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Haunted or not, mademoiselle, it is a rendezvous I must keep. But first, tell me, did Monsieur Crane ever visit your library?" Clara frowned, tapping her pen. "Once or twice. He borrowed books on local history, particularly about the Langley family. He seemed obsessed with their lineage, asked about old scandals." "Scandals?" Poirot's tone was light, but his gaze was sharp. "Oh, the usual gossip," Clara said, waving a hand. "The Langleys have always been wealthy, but secretive. There's talk of a disowned sibling, a fortune lost in a bad deal, but it's all whispers. Reginald was digging into it, though. He mentioned something about a key to the truth." Poirot tucked the diary into his coat. "You have been most helpful, Mademoiselle Henshaw. I shall return if the code yields further mysteries." Back at Blackthorn Manor, the atmosphere was taut as a violin string. The Langley siblings, Eleanor and Victor, sat in the drawing-room, their cousin Beatrice hovering near the fireplace. Victor, a broad-shouldered man with a perpetually furrowed brow, was nursing a brandy. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Reginald's death was a tragedy, but why drag us into it, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Monsieur Langley, a man does not die in a locked room by accident, nor does he write in code for amusement. The diary of Monsieur Crane speaks of a scarlet key and a meeting at the old yew tree. Do any of you know of this?" Beatrice, her delicate features pale, clutched a shawl. "The old yew, that's in the churchyard. It's just a creepy old tree." "Creepy, perhaps," Poirot said, "but significant. And the scarlet key, what is it?" Victor slammed his glass down. "Enough of this nonsense. Reginald was a meddler, always stirring up trouble. If he got himself killed, it's no surprise." Eleanor shot her brother a warning glance. "Victor, hold your tongue." "Monsieur Poirot, we know nothing of keys or trees. Reginald was troubled. His stories were fantasies." Poirot's mustache quivered. "Fantasies, mademoiselle, or truths too dangerous to speak aloud. I shall attend this meeting at the old yew tonight. Perhaps the scarlet key will reveal itself." As he left the drawing-room, Poirot caught Beatrice's fleeting glance toward Victor, a silent communication that did not escape his notice. The Langleys were hiding something, and the diary was the thread that would unravel their secrets. The churchyard at dusk was a tableau of shadows, the ancient yew tree looming like a sentinel. Poirot, cloaked in a dark overcoat, blended into the gloom, his eyes fixed on the gnarled trunk. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. At precisely 11 p.m., a figure emerged from the fog, cloaked and hooded, moving with purpose toward the yew. Poirot's heart quickened. He stepped silently closer, his polished shoes sinking into the soft ground. The figure knelt at the base of the tree, digging with gloved hands. A metallic glint caught the moonlight, a small box, etched with a crest. Before Poirot could approach, the church bell tolled, a deep, mournful clang that shattered the silence. The figure bolted, dropping the box, which tumbled into the grass. Poirot retrieved it, his fingers brushing the cold metal. It was locked, but the crest matched one he'd seen in the Manor's Hall, a Langley emblem. He pocketed the box, his mind racing. The scarlet key was no metaphor, it was real, and someone in St. Aldwyn's was desperate to claim it. The next morning, Poirot returned to the library, the box tucked safely in his satchel. Clara Henshaw was waiting, her desk now a battlefield of papers and cipher grids. "You look like a man who's found something," she said, peering over her glasses. "Indeed, mademoiselle," Poirot said, producing the box. "This was hidden at the old yew. I believe the scarlet key unlocks it. But the diary may hold more clues." They returned to the code, deciphering another entry. "SK guards the truth of the fallen." The phrase was enigmatic, but Clara's eyes widened. "The fallen," she said. "There's a local legend about a Langley who fell from grace, a sibling cast out decades ago. Could this be related?" Poirot nodded, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The diary, the key, the box, they point to a secret the Langleys wish to bury. But who was at the yew last night, and why flee? Clara tapped the diary. "There's another meeting time here tomorrow at midnight. Same place. You could catch them." Poirot smiled, a rare glint of satisfaction. "A trap, mademoiselle, is precisely what I intend to set." That evening, Poirot dined at the Manor, observing the Langleys with renewed scrutiny. Victor was sullen, Eleanor evasive, and Beatrice fidgety, her fingers twisting a locket at her throat. The locket, Poirot noted, bore the same crest as the box. He made polite conversation, dropping hints about the yew tree and the scarlet key. Watching for reactions, Beatrice spilled her wine, and Victor's jaw tightened. After dinner, Poirot slipped into the Manor study, where Crane's belongings had been stored. He re-examined the diary, finding a new entry. "VL knows all, Victor Langley." The initials were damning, but Poirot needed proof. He resolved to stake out the churchyard again, determined to unmask the cloaked figure. Midnight arrived, crisp and clear, the fog thinner than the previous night. Poirot hid behind a crumbling gravestone, the box in his pocket, the diary's words echoing in his mind. At 12:03, the figure returned, moving with the same stealth. This time, Poirot was ready. As the figure reached the yew, he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "Bonsoir," he said. "You seek the scarlet key." "Non, but it is I who have found it." The figure froze, then turned, revealing a face half hidden by the hood. Poirot's lantern caught the glint of a familiar locket. "Beatrice Langley." She gasped, her hands trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, I can explain." "Explain, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone firm but not unkind. "But first, tell me why you dig in the dark, and what this box contains." Beatrice's eyes darted to the tree, then back to Poirot. It's my mother's. She was a Langley, disowned long ago. Reginald found out, and he was going to expose it. I didn't kill him, I swear. I just wanted the box. It holds her letters, proof of her claim to the estate." Poirot studied her, his mind cataloging every nuance. "And the scarlet key, it's real," she whispered. "Hidden somewhere in the Manor. Reginald knew where, but he died before he could tell me." Poirot handed her the box, his expression unreadable. "Return to the Manor, mademoiselle. Say nothing of this. I shall find your key and the truth." As Beatrice vanished into the night, Poirot stood alone under the yew, the box heavy in his hand. The diary's code was unraveling, but the mystery deepened. Victor's initials, Beatrice's secret, the scarlet key, they were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a larger truth. Crane's murder was no random act. It was a calculated move to silence a man who knew too much. Poirot's thoughts turned to the next step, a stakeout at the churchyard to catch the true mastermind, and a search for the scarlet key within Blackthorn Manor. The Langleys were a family divided, their secrets as tangled as the roots of the ancient yew. But Hercule Poirot, with his little gray cells, was undaunted. The truth, he knew, was within reach, and he would seize it with the precision of a master. The chapter closed with Poirot walking back to the inn, the fog curling around him like a conspirator's whisper. Tomorrow, he would return to the manor, armed with the diary's secrets and a plan to unmask the killer. The scarlet key was out there, and with it, the heart of St. Aldwine's mystery. Chapter 5. The midnight rendezvous village of St. Aldwine's lay cloaked in a restless quiet, its cobblestone streets glistening under the faint glow of a gibbous moon. The fog that had plagued the village for days had lifted, leaving a crisp chill in the air that seemed to sharpen Hercule Poirot's senses. His mind, ever meticulous, churned over the clues gathered thus far, the cryptic diary, the vanished footprint, and the whispers of deceit that clung to Blackthorn Manor like ivy. Tonight, however, was not for reflection but for action. The deciphered code from the dead man's diary had revealed a time and place, a midnight rendezvous at the village churchyard. Poirot, with his characteristic blend of caution and curiosity, intended to be there. He adjusted his overcoat, its tailored lines a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings, and checked his pocket watch. 11:47 p.m. The church, a squat stone structure with a crooked spire, stood at the edge of the village, its graveyard a labyrinth of weathered headstones and forgotten names. Poirot's polished shoes crunched softly on the gravel path as he approached, his eyes scanning the shadows. The coded diary had hinted at a meeting, but with whom? And for what purpose? The answers, he sensed, were close yet as elusive as the mist that had only recently retreated. The churchyard was silent save for the occasional hoot of an owl perched in a gnarled yew tree. Poirot positioned himself behind a crumbling mausoleum, its moss-covered surface offering concealment. His breath was steady, his mind alert, every nerve attuned to the night's subtle movements. He had not informed the local constable, nor had he confided in Captain Hastings, who was away in London on unrelated business. This was a task for Poirot alone, for the little gray cells demanded solitude to unravel the threads of this mystery. At precisely midnight, a figure emerged from the darkness, moving with purpose toward the churchyard's center. The figure was cloaked, their face obscured by a hood, but their movements were deliberate, almost furtive. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The figure paused beside a weathered obelisk, glancing about as if expecting company. Poirot's heart quickened not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase. Who was this nocturnal visitor? A conspirator, a victim, or the murderer himself? Before he could speculate further, the church bell tolled a single, resonant clang that shattered the silence. The sound was unexpected, jarring, and the cloaked figure froze, then bolted toward the church's rear gate. Poirot cursed softly. In French, his plan disrupted, he stepped from his hiding place, moving swiftly but silently, his cane tapping lightly on the ground. The figure was fast, but Poirot was determined. He followed the shadow through the gate, down a narrow lane, lined with hedgerows, their branches clawing at his coat. The chase ended abruptly when the figure stumbled, their cloak catching on a low branch. Poirot seized the moment, closing the distance. "Monsieur, or perhaps mademoiselle," he called, his voice calm but commanding. "It is futile to flee. Hercule Poirot wishes to speak with you." The figure turned, panting, but the hood remained low, obscuring their face. Poirot noted the glint of moonlight on something in their hand, a small object, perhaps a key or a weapon. Before he could press further, the figure tossed something to the ground and vanished into the underbrush. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers brushing the damp earth. There, Half buried in the soil was a torn glove, its fine leather embroidered, with a crest a stylized hawk clutching a rose. His mind flashed to Blackthorn Manor, to the Langley family, and to Beatrice, the enigmatic cousin whose nervous demeanor had piqued his suspicion. Poirot pocketed the glove, his lips curling into a faint smile. "The night, it yields its secrets," he murmured. He retraced his steps to the churchyard, determined to examine the scene before the trail grew cold. The obelisk where the figure had paused bore no obvious clues, no carvings, no hidden compartments, but Poirot's eyes caught a faint disturbance in the grass nearby. A small patch had been trampled, as if someone had stood there for some time. He crouched, his fingers tracing the outline of a shallow indentation, not a footprint, but something else, a box, perhaps, or a bag, briefly set down. The church itself was locked, its heavy oak door unyielding. Poirot circled the building, his mind racing. The bell's toll had been no accident. Someone had rung it to startle the cloaked figure. An accomplice, or another player in this intricate game. He resolved to investigate the bell tower at first light, but for now, the glove was his prize. Its crest was unmistakable, linked to the Langley family, and Beatrice in particular. She had been evasive during their brief encounters, her eyes darting away when questioned about the manor's history. Was she the cloaked figure, or was someone framing her? By dawn, Poirot was back at the inn, seated at a corner table with a cup of tisane steaming before him. The glove lay on the table, its embroidery catching the morning light. He had sent a message to Beatrice, requesting her presence at the inn under the pretense of discussing the manor's history. She arrived promptly, her auburn hair neatly pinned, her expression a careful mask of politeness. Yet Poirot, with his keen eye for human nature, noted the faint tremor in her hands as she sat. "Mademoiselle Beatrice," he began, his tone genial but probing, "you are fond of late-night strolls. Nong, the churchyard, perhaps, under the moon's watchful eye." Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. I was at the manor last night, as always." Poirot produced the glove with a flourish, placing it between them. "And this, mademoiselle, it is yours, is it not?" "The crest of the Langley family is most distinctive." Beatrice's face paled, but she shook her head. "I've never seen it before. Many in the village could have such a glove. The Langley crest is no secret." "Perhaps," Poirot said, leaning forward, his mustache twitching. "But the one who wore this glove was in the churchyard at midnight, awaiting a meeting that never occurred. A meeting, I suspect, tied to the death of our unfortunate friend in the locked room. You will tell me, mademoiselle, what you know of such matters." Beatrice's composure cracked, her fingers twisting in her lap. "I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I was not there. I cannot explain the glove, but I have no reason to skulk about at night. I want only to protect my family's name." Poirot studied her, his gray cells working furiously. Her denial was vehement, but her nervousness betrayed her. Was she lying? Or was she genuinely unaware of the glove's journey to the churchyard? He decided to press further, but gently, like a fisherman coaxing a wary trout. "Mademoiselle, the truth is a delicate thing, but it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. If you were not the cloaked figure, then someone wishes me to believe you were. Tell me, who in Blackthorn Manor might wish to cast suspicion upon you?" Beatrice hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "Victor," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, "my cousin. He's always resented me, ever since I returned to the manor after my mother's death. He thinks I'm after the inheritance, but I only want what's rightfully mine." Poirot nodded, filing away this morsel of information. Victor Langley, the brash and ambitious heir, had been quick to point fingers at others during Poirot's interviews. His hostility toward Beatrice was palpable, but was it enough to frame her in a murder? Or was Beatrice herself playing a deeper game, deflecting blame to protect her own secrets? The conversation was interrupted by the innkeeper, who bustled over with a tray of scones. "Monsieur Poirot, you'll waste away without breakfast," she said, her tone motherly. Poirot smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere. He excused Beatrice, noting her hurried departure, and turned his attention to the glove once more. Its leather was supple, its stitching precise, hardly the work of a common villager. Whoever had dropped it, intentionally or not, had left a thread for Poirot to pull. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Poirot visited the church, gaining access to the bell tower with the vicar's reluctant permission. The rope was frayed, suggesting recent use, and a smudge of dirt on the floor hinted at a hasty visitor. No further clues presented themselves, but Poirot was undeterred. He returned to the manor, where the Langley family was preparing for a dinner party that evening, a grand affair. Despite the shadow of murder hanging over them, as the day waned, Poirot's thoughts returned to the churchyard. The cloaked figures. Escape had been too convenient. The bells tolled too perfectly timed. He suspected a conspiracy, one that extended beyond the Langley family to someone in the village, or perhaps someone posing as a villager. Mr. Harrow, the so-called historian, had been notably absent during Poirot's morning inquiries. His claim to be researching local history seemed flimsy, a cover for something more sinister. At the manor, the dinner party was a tense affair. Eleanor Langley, the eldest sibling, presided with strained elegance, her smiles brittle as she deflected questions about the family's troubles. Victor was loud and boisterous, his laughter grating on Poirot's nerves. Beatrice, meanwhile, kept to herself, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an intruder. Poirot observed them all, his mind cataloguing every glance, every gesture. During a lull in the conversation, he slipped away to explore the manor's west wing, where the dead man's room had been sealed. The lock was intact, but Poirot's keen eye caught a faint scratch on the doorframe, a sign of tampering. Inside, the room was as he had left it, sparse, with a single bed, a desk, and a wardrobe. But something felt different. He knelt by the desk, his fingers brushing the underside, and found a small notch. With a gentle press, a hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a scrap of paper. The paper bore a single word: traitor. Poirot's pulse quickened. The dead man had known something worth killing for. Was the cloaked figure the traitor, or was the traitor still at large, orchestrating events from the shadows? Poirot pocketed the note, his resolve hardening. The dinner party continued, oblivious to his discovery, but Poirot knew the night's work was far from over. As the evening drew to a close, he confronted Beatrice once more, this time in the manor's garden, where the air was thick with the scent of roses. "Mademoiselle," he said, his voice low, "the glove, the churchyard, the word traitor, these are pieces of a puzzle. You hold one of them, I am certain. Speak now, or the consequences may be grave." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "I cannot, Monsieur Poirot, not yet. But I swear, I am no murderer." Poirot let her go, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The glove was evidence, but of what? A frame-up? A mistake? Or a deliberate clue? He returned to his room at the inn, the weight of the case pressing upon him. Yet he was satisfied, for the night had yielded progress. The cloaked figure remained a mystery, but Poirot was closing in. The little gray cells, as always, were at work, and the truth, he knew, could not elude him for long. The chapter closed with Poirot at his window, gazing out at the moonlit village. Somewhere in St. Aldwines, a killer waited, their secrets unraveling with every step Poirot took. He smiled, a predator's smile, and murmured, "The game, it is afoot." Chapter 6. The stolen relic dining hall of Blackthorn Manor gleamed under the soft glow of a chandelier, its crystal prism scattering light across the polished mahogany table. The Langley family, their guests, and Hercule Poirot sat in a tableau of strained civility, the air thick with the scent of roasted pheasant and an undercurrent of suspicion. It was the evening of the annual dinner party, a tradition meant to showcase the family's wealth and unity, but tonight, the facade was brittle. Poirot, seated at the far end, observed the room with his usual precision, his small, neat mustache twitching as he noted every glance, every gesture. Eleanor Langley, the eldest sibling, presided at the head of the table, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her smile was tight, her eyes darting to her brother Victor, who lounged with a glass of claret, his posture too relaxed for the tension in the room. Beatrice, their cousin, sat opposite, her delicate fingers toying with a silver fork, her face pale against the emerald green of her gown. Mr. Harrow, the enigmatic historian, was conspicuously absent, though his place setting remained untouched. The other guests, local gentry, a retired colonel, and a nervous young curate filled the remaining chairs, their chatter a thin veneer over the unease. Poirot sipped his wine, his mind replaying the events of the past days, the anonymous letter, the lock-trimmed death, the vanishing footprint, the coded diary, and the cloaked figure in the churchyard. Each clue was a thread in a tapestry he was determined to unravel. Tonight, he sensed, the pattern would shift. The meal progressed through courses, the clink of cutlery punctuated by forced laughter. As the dessert plates were cleared, poached pears in a delicate syrup, Eleanor rose, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Ladies and gentlemen, before we retire to the drawing-room, I wish to share a family treasure. She gestured to a footman, who approached with the velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled on black satin, was the Langley sapphire brooch, its deep, blue facets catching the light like a star trapped in stone. Gasps rippled through the room. This brooch, Eleanor said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease, has been in our family for generations, a symbol of our legacy. It is said to hold the luck of the Langleys. She passed the box to Victor, who gave it a cursory glance before handing it to Beatrice. Beatrice's fingers lingered on the brooch, her expression unreadable, before she passed it to the colonel. Poirot's gray cells hummed. The brooch was more than a jewel. It was a catalyst. He noted how Beatrice's hand trembled, how Victor's disinterest seemed calculated, how Eleanor's smile faltered as the box made its rounds. The curate, young Mr. Wren, fumbled the box, nearly dropping it, and apologized profusely. The colonel, with a grunt, declared it a fine bauble. The box returned to Eleanor, who placed it on a sideboard near the head of the table. Under the watchful eye of the footman, the party moved to the drawing-room for coffee and liqueurs. The brooch, left behind under the pretext of safety. Poirot lingered, ostensibly to admire a portrait of a Langley ancestor, but his eyes never left the sideboard. He noted the footman's brief absence to fetch more brandy, the moment when the room was unguarded. His instincts prick-led. An hour later, as the guests sipped their drinks and the gramophone played a soft waltz, a piercing scream shattered the mood. Eleanor stood at the sideboard, the velvet box open and empty. "The brooch," she cried. "It's gone." Chaos erupted. Guests crowded around, voices overlapping in shock and accusation. Victor slammed his glass down, his face flushed. "This is outrageous," who was near the sideboard. Beatrice clutched her shawl, her eyes wide. The colonel barked for the servants to be questioned. Mr. Wren, the curate, stammered prayers under his breath. Poirot stepped forward, his calm presence cutting through the clamor. "Mies Amos, please, let us have order. The brooch has not vanished into the ether. It is here, in this house, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it." His voice, though soft, carried an authority that silenced the room. He turned to Eleanor. "Mademoiselle, when did you last see the brooch?" "When I placed the box on the sideboard," she replied, her voice trembling. "The footman was here, but he stepped away briefly, and who was in the dining hall during that time?" Poirot's eyes swept the room, noting each guest's reaction. "I was in the drawing-room," Victor said quickly, "talking with the colonel about his time in India." "I was with Victor," the colonel confirmed, though his gruff tone wavered. "I stayed near the gramophone," Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't go back to the dining hall," Mr. Wren nodded vigorously. "I was with Miss Beatrice, choosing a record." Poirot's gaze lingered on each speaker, his mind cataloguing their words against their earlier movements. Mr. Harrow's absence loomed large. "And where is Monsieur Harrow?" he asked. Eleanor frowned. "He sent his apologies before dinner, claiming a headache. He retired to his room. Convenient," Victor muttered, earning a sharp look from Beatrice. Poirot raised a hand. "We will ascertain Monsieur Harrow's whereabouts. For now, I ask that no one leaves the manor. The brooch is a clue, and its theft is no accident. I will examine the dining hall." The guests dispersed, murmuring, as Poirot returned to the dining hall with Eleanor and the butler, Mr. Grayson, a stoic man with a limp from an old war wound. The sideboard stood undisturbed, the velvet box open like a wound. Poirot examined it, noting the lack of forced entry. The lock was intact, suggesting someone with access or skill had opened it. "Grayson," Poirot said, "who had access to the dining hall during the footman's absence." "Only the guests, Sir," Grayson replied. "The staff were in the kitchen or serving in the drawing-room. The footman, Thomas, was gone for perhaps 2 minutes. 2 minutes is an eternity for a thief," Poirot mused. He inspected the sideboard, the floor, the walls. A faint scratch on the wood caught his eye, barely visible in the dim light. He crouched, his fingers tracing the mark. "Interesting," he murmured. "This scratch is fresh, made by something sharp, perhaps a tool." Eleanor gasped. "You think someone pried the box open?" "No, mademoiselle, the box was not forced. This scratch is from something else, a distraction." "Perhaps." Poirot's eyes narrowed. He moved to the wall behind the sideboard, where a heavy tapestry hung. Pushing it aside, he revealed a panel, slightly ajar. "Mon Dieu," he said softly, "a hidden safe." The safe was small, its door unlocked. Inside was nothing but a folded note, written in a hurried scrawl. "The trader's debt must be paid?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "A clue within a clue," he said, pocketing the note. "This safe was meant to hold something of value, but it is empty." "The brooch, perhaps." Eleanor paled. "The safe was my father's. Only the family knew of it." "Then we have a short list of suspects," Poirot said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "But first, we must restore calm. The guests are agitated, and panic breeds mistakes. I will address them." Back in the drawing-room, Poirot faced the assembled group. "Ladies and gentlemen, the theft of the brooch is a serious matter, but I assure you, it will be recovered. I ask for your cooperation. Remain in the manor, and allow me to work. The thief is among us, but they will not escape." Hercule Poirot. The guests nodded, some reluctantly. Victor crossed his arms, his jaw tight. Beatrice stared at the floor, her hands clasped. The colonel muttered about damned skullduggery. Mr. Wren looked as if he might faint. Poirot spent the next hour questioning the staff. Thomas, the footman, swore he'd only left to fetch brandy at Grayson's order. The maids confirmed they'd been in the kitchen, preparing coffee. The cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Hale, was indignant at the suggestion of theft. "I've served the Langleys for 20 years, she huffed. "I'd sooner steal the moon than that brooch." Poirot nodded, his mind elsewhere. The note in the safe gnawed at him. The trader's debt. It suggested betrayal, perhaps tied to the Langley inheritance or the murder that had brought him here. And Mr. Harrow's absence was too convenient. He resolved to visit the historian's room. Harrow's quarters were on the 2nd floor, a modest guest room with a view of the fog-shrouded gardens. Poirot knocked, receiving no answer. He tried the door unlocked. Inside, the room was tidy, but a suitcase lay open, half-packed. Papers littered the desk, including a sketch of the Langley crest and notes on the family's history. One page caught Poirot's eye, a list of names, with Beatrice Langley circled in red ink. "Curio," Poirot murmured. He examined the suitcase, finding a small vial of ink and a pen with a chipped nib matching the scratch on the sideboard. "Monsieur Harrow, you are not what you seem." Returning downstairs, Poirot gathered the family in the library, away from the guests. Eleanor, Victor, and Beatrice sat in uneasy silence. The brooch, Poirot began, was taken to distract us from a larger truth. The safe behind the tapestry was opened, but its contents were already gone. The note speaks of a trader's debt. Tell me, who among you knows of this debt? Victor scoffed. You're chasing ghosts, Poirot. The brooch is probably with some light-fingered servant. Beatrice's eyes flicked to Victor, then away. I know nothing of a debt, she said softly. Eleanor hesitated. My father mentioned debts once, but only in passing. He said some promises outlive us. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The brooch's theft was a feint, meant to obscure the safe's true purpose. But what had it held, and why was Harrow's room half-packed? He suspected an inside job, with Harrow as either culprit or accomplice. As the night wore on, Poirot patrolled the manor, his senses alert. In the small hours, he heard a creak from the dining hall. Moving silently, he peered. Inside, a figure stood at the sideboard, cloaked in shadow, tampering with the velvet box. Poirot stepped forward, his voice sharp. Aradas, show yourself. The figure froze, then bolted for the tapestry. Poirot gave chase, but the panel clicked, shut behind them. He pushed the tapestry aside, finding the safe open again, now empty even of the note. Sacre bleu, he muttered. The thief was bold, but sloppy. By dawn, Poirot had restored calm to the manor, promising the guests the brooch would be found. He sat in the library, the note's words echoing in his mind. The trader's debt must be paid. The theft was no random act. It was tied to the murder, the inheritance, and the secrets of Blackthorn Manor. He suspected Harrow, but Beatrice's nervousness and Victor's arrogance could not be ignored. Poirot closed his eyes, his gray cells aligning the facts. The brooch was a symbol, its theft a message. The safe held the key to the trader's identity, but its contents were gone. He would need to dig deeper, to follow the threads to their source. For now, he had a lead: Mr. Harrow's half-packed suitcase and the circled name of Beatrice Langley. The chapter ended with Poirot standing at the manor's window, the fog lifting to reveal the village below. He was one step closer to the truth, but the game was far from over. Chapter 7. The stranger's tale of morning sun pierced the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor, casting slanted beams across the oak-paneled study where Hercule Poirot sat, his fingers steepled, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour. The events of the previous night, the vanishing sapphire brooch, the empty safe, the cryptic note about a trader's debt, had left the Langley family in a state of brittle unease. Poirot, however, thrived in such tension, his mind a finely tuned instrument, plucking at the discordant notes of human behavior to compose a symphony of truth. The study door creaked open, and Mrs. Langley, the matriarch, entered, her face a mask of aristocratic composure that failed to conceal the tremor in her hands. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low, this house is unraveling. First a murder, now a theft. I fear we are cursed. Poirot's gray eyes flickered with amusement, though his expression remained grave. Madame, a curse is but a story we tell when we cannot face the truth. And the truth, I assure you, is within my grasp. Tell me, where is Mr. Harrow this morning? Mrs. Langley hesitated, her fingers twisting the lace of her shawl. He left at dawn, claiming he needed to consult a colleague in the village. He's been peculiar since the dinner. Peculiar, Poirot repeated, savoring the word. A most useful observation. I shall speak with him upon his return. In the meantime, madame, I suggest you keep your family close. The threads of this mystery are tightening. As Mrs. Langley departed, Poirot rose, adjusting his waistcoat. Mr. Harrow, the self-proclaimed historian, had been a shadow in the manor's chaos, always present, yet curiously absent at critical moments. His absence during the brooch's theft had not escaped Poirot's notice, nor had the faint unease in his eyes when questioned about his purpose in St. Aldwain's. The time had come to unravel the stranger's tale. The village of St. Aldwain's was a postcard of rural England, its cobblestone streets winding past ivy-clad cottages and a stone bridge spanning a burbling brook. Poirot, dressed in his immaculate black suit, a silver-tipped cane in hand, made his way to the Red Lion Inn, where Harrow had taken a room. The innkeeper, a ruddy-faced man named Mr. Grimsby, greeted him with a wary nod. "Mr. Harrow, you say?" Grimsby scratched his chin. "He's not here, sir. Left an hour ago, muttering about old records at the church. Seemed in a right hurry. The church," Poirot mused, his eyes narrowing. "Merci, Monsieur Grimsby, you have been most helpful." The church of St. Aldwyn stood at the village's edge, its spire piercing the low clouds. Poirot's polished shoes clicked against the flagstones as he approached, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and ancient stone. Inside, the nave was dim, lit only by flickering candles and the weak light filtering through stained glass windows. At the far end, near the altar, stood Mr. Harrow, hunched over a stack of parish records, his fingers smudged with dust. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot called, his voice echoing softly. Harrow started, nearly dropping a leather-bound ledger. "Monsieur Poirot." Harrow's smile was strained, his spectacles glinting in the candlelight. "I didn't expect you here. Non, I imagine not." Poirot approached, his cane tapping rhythmically. "Yet here I am, curious about a historian who spends his days in a village church, far from the manor where a murder and a theft have occurred. Tell me, what do you seek in these dusty tomes?" Harrow adjusted his spectacles, his fingers twitching. "I'm researching the Langley family's history. They have connections to a matter I've been studying for years. Old land disputes, inheritances, that sort of thing." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "And this research, it requires you to absent yourself during a theft, to skulk in shadows while a family's heirloom vanishes." Harrow's face paled. "I had nothing to do with the brooch, I swear. I was in my room, reviewing notes." "Alone, of course," Poirot said, his tone dry, "a most convenient alibi." "Come, Monsieur Harrow, you are not a fool, and neither am I. You are no historian, are you?" The silence stretched, heavy as the fog that had greeted Poirot's arrival. In St. Aldwyn's, Harrow's shoulders slumped, and he sank onto a pew, his hands clasped tightly. "You're right," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a historian. I'm a private investigator, hired to find someone, a Langley relative, long thought dead." Poirot's eyebrows rose, though he betrayed no surprise. "A relative, most intriguing. Who is this phantom, and who employed you to find them?" Harrow hesitated, then reached into his coat and produced a small photograph, its edges worn. It showed a young woman, her face strikingly similar to one Poirot had seen before in a locket worn by Beatrice Langley. "This is Clara Langley," Harrow said. "She disappeared 20 years ago after a scandal. Her brother, the late Mr. Langley, hired me before his death to find her. He believed she was alive, hiding somewhere in England." Poirot studied the photograph, his mind racing. The resemblance to Beatrice was unmistakable, the same sharp cheekbones, the same haunted eyes. "And you believe this Clara is connected to the murder of the man who sent me the anonymous letter?" Harrow nodded. "I think the victim, Mr. Grayson, knew something about Clara. He was a solicitor, handling Langley family affairs. I found a letter in his room before the police took it suggesting he'd located her. Then he was killed." Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on his cane. "A letter, you say? And you did not think to share this with Poirot?" "Non, Monsieur Harrow. You play a dangerous game. What else do you conceal?" Harrow's eyes darted to the shadows, as if expecting an eavesdropper. "There's more. I've been followed since I arrived in St. Aldwyn's. Someone in the manor doesn't want Clara found. I think it's tied to the inheritance. Clara was disowned, but she had a claim to Blackthorn Manor. If she's alive, it changes everything." Poirot's mind whirred, fitting pieces into place. The torn glove with Beatrice's crest, the coded diary mentioning a scarlet key, the empty safe, all pointed to a family desperate to bury its past. But was Clara Langley the key, or merely another thread in the tapestry of deceit? "Very well," Poirot said, his voice crisp. "You will return to the manor with me, Monsieur Harrow. We shall continue this conversation where I can observe the reactions of those who may wish to silence you." Harrow's face tightened, but he nodded. "I'll cooperate, but be careful, Monsieur Poirot. Someone in that house is dangerous." Back at Blackthorn Manor, the atmosphere was taut as a violin string. The Langley family gathered in the drawing room, their faces a gallery of suspicion and fatigue. Eleanor, the eldest sibling, sat rigidly, her embroidery untouched. Victor, her brother, paced near the fireplace, his eyes darting to the door. Beatrice, their cousin, clutched her locket, her fingers white-knuckled. Mrs. Langley hovered near the window, her gaze distant. Poirot entered with Harrow at his side, the latter's discomfort palpable. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice commanding attention, "I have learned something most curious. Monsieur Harrow is not what he seems. He is a private investigator, seeking a lost Langley relative, Clara Langley, who vanished 20 years ago." A gasp rippled through the room. Beatrice's hand flew to her locket, and Victor stopped pacing, his face a mask of fury. "Clara," he spat. "She's dead? This is nonsense, is it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then why, Monsieur Victor, do you react so strongly? And you, Mademoiselle Beatrice, why do you clutch that locket, which bears the face of a woman who could be your mother?" Beatrice's eyes widened, and she shrank back. I don't know what you mean." "Oh, but I think you do," Poirot said softly. "The photograph Monsieur Harrow carries matches the image in your locket. Clara Langley was your mother, was she not? And you have known, perhaps for years, that she lives." The room erupted. Victor shouted, "This is absurd." Eleanor rose, her embroidery falling to the floor, and Mrs. Langley gripped the window sill, her face ashen. Beatrice, however, remained silent, tears welling in her eyes. "Enough." Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, speak. The truth, if you please." Beatrice's voice trembled as she spoke. She was my mother. I was a child when she left. She wrote to me, years later, saying she'd been disowned for marrying against the family's wishes. I never told anyone. I thought it would ruin us." Poirot nodded, his expression softening. "And the locket, it was hers," Beatrice whispered. "She sent it to me, with her picture. I've worn it ever since." Victor rounded on her. "You knew and said nothing. You let this investigator snoop around, stirring up trouble." "Peace, Monsieur Victor," Poirot interjected. "Your anger betrays you. If Clara Langley lives, her claim to the estate threatens your inheritance, does it not? A motive, perhaps, for murder." Victor's face reddened, but he said nothing. Poirot turned to Harrow. "And you, Monsieur, what else do you know of Clara's fate?" Harrow hesitated, then spoke. "I tracked her to a convent in Yorkshire, where she lived under a false name. She's frail, but alive. I was to meet Grayson to confirm her identity, but he was killed before we could." Poirot's mind raced. The murder, the theft, the coded diary all circled back to Clara Langley, but the pieces did not yet fit perfectly. The traitor's debt note suggested a deeper betrayal, one that might implicate not just Victor, but others in the manor. That evening, Poirot sat alone in the manor's library, the air thick with the scent of old leather and wax. He spread Grayson's diary before him, its coded entries partially deciphered. The scarlet key remained elusive, but a new phrase had emerged. "The shadow moves at dusk." Poirot's fingers traced the words, his thoughts drifting to Harrow's revelation. A soft creak interrupted his reverie. He turned to see Eleanor, standing in the doorway, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely audible, "I must speak with you, alone." Poirot gestured to a chair. "Speak, madame, the night is young," and Poirot listens. Eleanor sat, her hands twisting in her lap. "I knew about Clara. She was my sister. When she married that man, a penniless artist, father disowned her. I helped him do it. I was young, afraid of losing my place in the family. I've carried that guilt ever since." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And now, madame." "Why speak now?" "Because," Eleanor whispered, "I saw someone last night, near the safe. It wasn't Victor or Beatrice. It was a woman, cloaked, her face hidden. I think it was Clara." Poirot's heart quickened, but his face remained impassive. "A woman, you say? Most interesting. And you did not confront her?" Eleanor shook her head. "I was afraid. If Clara's back, it means she wants revenge for what we did to her." Poirot rose, his mind alight with possibilities. "Merci, madame, you have given me much to consider. Rest now, but say nothing of this to anyone." As Eleanor left, Poirot paced the library, his thoughts a whirlwind. Clara Langley, alive and in St. Aldwyn's. The cloaked figure at the churchyard, the vanished footprint, the stolen brooch all pointed to a presence moving unseen, manipulating events. But was Clara the mastermind, or another pawn in a larger game? The next morning, Poirot summoned Harrow to the manor's garden, where roses bloomed in defiant splendor against the autumn chill. "Monsieur Harrow," he said, "you will take me to this convent in Yorkshire. We must confirm Clara's presence, or lack thereof. But first, tell me, have you received threats since arriving here?" Harrow nodded, his face grim. "A note slipped under my door 2 nights ago. It said, 'Leave, or join Grayson.' I thought it was Victor, but now I'm not sure." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Show me this note." Harrow produced a crumpled paper, the words scrawled in black ink. Poirot studied it, noting the precise, almost feminine script. Not Victor's hand, he was certain. "Very well," he said. "We depart for Yorkshire at once. But be warned, Monsieur Harrow Poirot trusts no one until the truth is laid bare." As they prepared to leave, Poirot glanced at Blackthorn Manor, its windows glinting like eyes in the morning light. The house held its secrets tightly, but Poirot was relentless. Clara Langley, the sapphire brooch, the murder of Grayson, all were threads in a tapestry he would unravel, stitch by stitch. The chapter closed with Poirot climbing into a hired car, Harrow at his side, the road to Yorkshire stretching before them. In his mind, the pieces of the puzzle danced: Clara's photograph, Beatrice's locket, Eleanor's confession, the cryptic note. He was satisfied, for now, with a new lead: the convent, where Clara Langley might hold the key to the manor's darkest secrets. But one question lingered, sharp as a blade: if Clara was alive, who had ensured Grayson's silence, and why? Chapter 8. The poisoned Chaliceth village of St. Aldwyn's buzzed with an electric hum, its cobbled streets adorned with bunting that fluttered like captive butterflies in the late summer breeze. The annual fete, a cherished tradition, had transformed the sleepy hamlet into a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Stalls lined the village green, offering everything from homemade jams to intricately carved wooden trinkets. Laughter mingled with the clink of glasses, and the air carried the sweet scent of freshly baked scones and the tang of cider. Yet, beneath this veneer of festivity, Hercule Poirot sensed a current of unease, a shadow that clung to the edges of the merriment like a storm cloud threatening a clear sky. Poirot, impeccably dressed in a crisp linen suit despite the warmth, adjusted his hat and surveyed the scene from beneath the shade of an ancient oak. His gray-green eyes, sharp as a falcon's, darted from face to face, cataloging expressions, gestures, and the subtle interplay of glances among the villagers. The events of the past days, the murder, the stolen brooch, the cryptic clues had woven a tapestry of suspicion that only his meticulous mind could unravel. Today, he was certain, would bring a new thread to the pattern. The fate was in full swing when Poirot's attention was drawn to the Langley family, who held court near a garlanded marquee. Eleanor Langley, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, smiled tightly as she poured lemonade for a gaggle of children. Her brother, Victor, lounged nearby, his handsome features marred by a petulant scowl as he sipped from a silver goblet. Beatrice, their cousin, stood apart, her delicate frame swathed in a pale green dress that seemed to shimmer with an almost spectral quality. Her eyes, Poirot noted, flickered nervously toward Victor, as if she feared his very presence. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured to himself, stroking his mustache. The tension, it is palpable, but what is the source? The inheritance, the murder, or something yet undiscovered? He had come to the fete not as a guest, but as an observer, his mind a finely tuned instrument seeking discord in the symphony of village life. The anonymous letter that had summoned him to St. Aldwyn's, the locked-room death of its author, and the subsequent revelations at Blackthorn Manor had convinced him that the Langley family was at the heart of this mystery. The glove with Beatrice's crest, the coded diary, the vanishing footprint all pointed to a conspiracy that was both intricate and deeply personal. Today, he hoped, the facade would crack dot as Poirot wandered among the stalls, pausing to admire a display of embroidered linens. A commotion erupted near the marquee. A cry sharp, anguish cut through the chatter, followed by the crash of metal against stone. Poirot's head snapped toward the sound, his heart quickening. He pushed through the crowd, his small, precise steps belying the urgency that propelled him. Victor Langley lay sprawled on the grass, his goblet overturned, its contents seeping into the earth like blood. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror as he clutched his throat. Eleanor knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to loosen his collar. Beatrice stood frozen, her hands clasped over her mouth, while a circle of villagers gaped in stunned silence. "Help him!" Eleanor cried, her voice breaking. "Someone, please!" Poirot was at Victor's side in an instant, his calm authority cutting through the panic. "Calmez-vous, mademoiselle," he said to Eleanor, his tone steady. "We must act swiftly. Fetch the doctor now." A young man in the crowd sprinted toward the village hall where Dr. Whitaker, the local physician, was judging the pie competition. Poirot knelt beside Victor, noting the sheen of sweat on his brow, the irregular gasping of his breath. The goblet, he observed, bore a faint greenish residue along its rim, a detail that sent a chill through him. "Monsieur Langley," Poirot said, his voice low but firm, "can you speak? What do you feel?" Victor's eyes, wild with pain, met Poirot's. "Burning," he rasped. "My throat, poison." The word sent a ripple through the crowd, murmurs rising like a swarm of bees. Poirot's mind raced, cataloging possibilities. Poison was no accident in a place like St. Aldwyn's, where secrets festered like weeds. He turned to Eleanor, who was wringing her hands, "Mademoiselle," who poured his wine. "I did," she stammered, her face pale, "from the same pitcher as everyone else. It can't be poisoned." "Yet it is," Poirot said, his tone gentle but unyielding. "We shall see." Dr. Whitaker arrived, a stout man with a florid complexion, his medical bag swinging from his hand. He knelt beside Victor, checking his pulse and peering into his eyes. "He's in distress," Whitaker said grimly. "We need to get him to my surgery at once." Poirot nodded, but his attention was on the goblet. He produced a handkerchief and carefully lifted it, ensuring the residue remained intact. "This, doctor, must be analyzed. It is, I believe, the key to this outrage," as Victor was carried away on a makeshift stretcher. Poirot's gaze swept the crowd, faces blurred into a mosaic of curiosity, fear, and yes, guilt. Someone here had laced Victor's wine with poison, and Poirot would not rest until he knew who. The surgery of Dr. Whitaker was a small, cluttered room at the edge of the village, its walls lined with shelves of jars and medical tomes. Victor lay on a narrow cot, his breathing shallow but steady, thanks to the doctor's swift administration of an antidote. Poirot stood by the window, the goblet wrapped in his handkerchief, his mind a whirl of calculations. "Monsieur Poirot." "Doctor," Whitaker said, wiping his brow, "he'll live, but it was a close thing. The poison was belladonna, a rare toxin in these parts. It causes paralysis and hallucinations if not treated promptly." "Belladonna," Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing. "A poison of intention. Not accident. Tell me, doctor, where might one procure such a substance here? Whitaker frowned, adjusting his spectacles. It's not common. Perhaps from a chemist in London. Or, he hesitated, glancing at the door. There's old Mrs. Grimsby, the herbalist. She grows medicinal plants, but I've never known her to deal in poisons. Merci, Poirot said, his mind already turning to this new lead. And the goblet, can you have it tested? I'll send it to a colleague in Oxford, Whitaker replied. We'll know more by tomorrow. Poirot nodded, satisfied for the moment. He left the surgery and made his way to the village green, where the fete continued, though its mood was now subdued. The villagers whispered, their eyes following him as he moved with the quiet purpose of a cat stalking prey. His first stop was the marquee, where Eleanor sat alone, her face buried in her hands. She looked up as Poirot approached, her eyes reddened. Is he will recover, Poirot said, seating himself beside her. But I must ask, Mademoiselle Langley, who had access to your brother's goblet? No one, she said, her voice trembling. I poured the wine myself, from a pitcher we all shared. I don't understand how this could happen. Poirot studied her, noting the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted away from his. And yet, it did. Tell me, did anyone approach the goblet after you poured it? Eleanor shook her head, but then paused, her brow furrowing. Wait, Beatrice was near the table. She offered to fetch Victor's goblet when he complained it was empty. But she couldn't have, she wouldn't. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. Mademoiselle Beatrice, he mused. She is, perhaps, not what she seems. Tell me, what is her grievance with your brother? Eleanor bit her lip, hesitating. They've never been close. Victor always thought Beatrice was beneath us, because of her mother's scandal. He's cruel to her sometimes, but I never thought it would come to this. Merci, Poirot said, rising, you have been most helpful. His next destination was the stall of Mrs. Grimsby, the herbalist, whose weathered face and sharp eyes belied her age. Her table was a riot of dried herbs, tinctures, and salves, each labeled in a spidery hand. Poirot greeted her with a polite bow, his charm disarming her initial wariness. Madame Grimsby, he began, I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek your expertise. Tell me, do you know of belladonna? Her eyes narrowed, but she answered readily. I know it. Deadly nightshade. It's called. I grow a bit for medicinal use, small doses for pain, you see. But I keep it locked away, too dangerous otherwise, and has anyone asked for it recently? Poirot pressed, his tone casual, but his eyes keen. Mrs. Grimsby hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice low. That cook from the manor, Mary Tate, came by last week, asking about strong herbs, said she needed something for a headache, but she was cagey. I gave her chamomile and sent her on her way. Interessant, Poirot said, his mind racing. Mary Tate, the cook with a known grudge against the Langleys, was now a person of interest. Madame, you have my gratitude. As he left the stall, Poirot's thoughts turned to the cook. Mary Tate was a stout woman with a quick temper, her resentment of the Langleys no secret in the village. She had worked at Blackthorn Manor for years, her loyalty strained by Victor's arrogance and the family's cavalier treatment of their staff. Could her anger have driven her to poison? Poirot found Mary at the manor's kitchen, kneading dough with a ferocity that suggested she was imagining Victor's face in the flour. She looked up as he entered, her expression guarded. Madame Tate, Poirot said, his voice smooth as velvet, I wish to speak of the fete. You were there, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Help set up the food, same as every year, and the wine, Poirot asked, his eyes locking onto hers. Did you handle the pitcher or the goblets? Her face reddened, but her voice was steady. I poured the pitchers, but I didn't touch the goblets. That was Miss Eleanor's job. Why are you asking? Poirot smiled, a gesture that did little to soften the intensity of his gaze. Because, madame, someone poisoned Monsieur Victor's wine. And I am told you sought strong herbs from Mrs. Grimsby. Mary's eyes widened, her hands clenching. Chamomile, that's all I asked for. I'd never poison anyone. No matter how much I hate that pompous fool. Yet you do hate him, Poirot said softly. Why? Mary's shoulders sagged, and she sank onto a stool. He's cruel. Always has been. Last month, he sacked my nephew for dropping a tray. The boy's got no other work now, but I swear, I didn't touch his wine. Poirot studied her, his mind weighing her words against her demeanor. Her anger was genuine, but so was her fear. He decided to test her further. Madame, where were you when Monsieur Victor collapsed at the pie stall? She said quickly. Ask Mrs. Whitlock. She was with me, tasting my apple crumble. There's bien, Poirot said, making a mental note to verify her alibi. I shall trouble you no further for now. As he left the kitchen, Poirot's thoughts swirled like leaves in a storm. Mary Tate's alibi, if true, would clear her, but it left the question of the poisoner unanswered. Beatrice's proximity to the goblet, Eleanor's nervousness, and the mysterious Mr. Harrow's absence during the theft of the sapphire brooch all were threads in a tapestry that was still incomplete. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold. When Poirot returned to the village green, the fete was winding down, the stalls being dismantled, but the air still hummed with whispers of the day's drama. Poirot sought out Mrs. Whitlock, a plump, cheerful woman who confirmed Mary Tate's alibi without hesitation. She was with me the whole time, Mrs. Whitlock said, her hands busy packing away her pies. Never left my side. Merci, Poirot said, his mind adjusting its calculations. Mary Tate was not the poisoner, but someone had used her grudge as a convenient distraction. The true culprit was clever, calculating, and deeply embedded in the web of St. Aldwyn's secrets. As he stood by the oak tree, Poirot's eyes fell on Beatrice, who was helping clear the marquee. Her movements were graceful but hurried, as if she wished to escape notice. Poirot approached her, his expression one of polite inquiry. Mademoiselle Beatrice, he said, a word, if you please. She stiffened, her hands clutching a stack of plates. What is it, Monsieur Poirot? The goblet, he said, his voice low. You fetched it for Monsieur Victor? Oui. Did you notice anything unusual? Her eyes flickered, but she met his gaze. No, nothing. I just picked it up from the table and gave it to him. I didn't even look at it closely. Poirot nodded, his smile enigmatic. And yet, it was poisoned. A curious coincidence, is it not? Beatrice's face paled, and she set the plates down with a clatter. You think I did it? I would never. Victor's my cousin, comme as vous, Poirot said, raising a hand. I accuse no one yet, but I observe, and I think, mademoiselle, that you know more than you say. She turned away, her lips trembling, and Poirot let her go. Confrontation would come later, when he had more pieces of the puzzle. For now, he was content to let her stew in her unease. That evening, Poirot sat in his room at the inn, a single candle casting shadows on the walls. He spread his notes across the table, each scrap of paper a fragment of the mystery. The belladonna, the goblet, the grudge, the glove, the coded diary, all were connected, but how? He closed his eyes, his mind a labyrinth of logic, and began to order the chaos. The poison, he reasoned, was not meant to kill, at least, not immediately. Victor's survival suggested a warning, a message to the Langleys, but who would send such a message, and why? Beatrice's crest on the glove linked her to the churchyard rendezvous, but her denial rang true. Eleanor's nervousness could be guilt, fear, or both. And Mr. Harrow, the so-called historian, remained an enigma, his absence during the brooch theft and his vague explanations raising Poirot's suspicions. As the candle flickered, Poirot's thoughts turned to the manor itself. Blackthorn Manor, with its hidden passages and empty safes, held secrets that went beyond the current generation. The disowned sibling, mentioned in the coded diary, was a shadow that loomed over the family. Could the poison be tied to that scandal, a revenge from the past? Poirot opened his eyes, a spark of certainty igniting within him. "We," he murmured. "The answer lies in the past, but it is acted upon in the present. Tomorrow, I shall seek the truth in the manor's shadows." He rose, extinguished the candle, and prepared for bed, his mind already planning the next day's inquiries. The poisoner would not escape him, for Hercule Poirot never failed to find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. The chapter closed with Poirot standing at his window, gazing out at the fog that had begun to creep back into St. Aldwyn's. The village was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Somewhere in its heart, a killer waited, and Poirot was determined to unmask them. "The vault, it speaks," Poirot replied. "Your mother, she was born of a disowned heiress. Tell me, what do you know of her past?" Beatrice sank into a chair, her voice low. "Mother never spoke of Blackthorn. She said it was cursed, that her family betrayed her mother. She died when I was young, but she left me this locket and told me to guard it. I came here to learn why, and did you?" Poirot pressed. "I found whispers of a fortune," Beatrice said. "Victor and Eleanor, they're obsessed with it. I think Mr. Grayson knew something, and that's why he died." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The fortune was the thread binding the murder, the theft, and the family's discord, but the vault's documents hinted at a deeper truth, a traitor still among them. Perhaps Victor, whose ledger might reveal more. That evening, Poirot dined with the Langleys, observing their strained civility. Victor's charm masked a predator's edge, while Eleanor's glances betrayed her fear. Mr. Harrow, silent, watched from the shadows. Poirot's thoughts turned to the vault's warning, a debt paid in blood. The murderer, he suspected, was not merely after wealth, but revenge. As dessert was served, a crash echoed from upstairs. The guests froze, and Poirot sprang to his feet. "Remain here," he commanded, racing toward the sound. In the library, a window was shattered, and a singed smell lingered. A book lay open on the floor, its pages charred but legible, revealing a map of the estate with a circled location. "The chapel." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The Scarlet Key," he murmured. The vault had given him the past. The chapel, he sensed, held the future. He secured the documents in his room, locking them in his valise, and resolved to visit the chapel at dawn. The chapter of the vault was closed, but the hunt was far from over. "The vault, it speaks," Poirot replied. "Your mother, she was born of a disowned heiress. Tell me, what do you know of her past?" Beatrice sank into a chair, her voice low. "Mother never spoke of Blackthorn. She said it was cursed, that her family betrayed her mother. She died when I was young, but she left me this locket and told me to guard it. I came here to learn why, and did you?" Poirot pressed. "I found whispers of a fortune," Beatrice said. "Victor and Eleanor, they're obsessed with it. I think Mr. Grayson knew something, and that's why he died." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The fortune was the thread binding the murder, the theft, and the family's discord, but the vault's documents hinted at a deeper truth, a traitor still among them. Perhaps Victor, whose ledger might reveal more. That evening, Poirot dined with the Langleys, observing their strained civility. Victor's charm masked a predator's edge, while Eleanor's glances betrayed her fear. Mr. Harrow, silent, watched from the shadows. Poirot's thoughts turned to the vault's warning, a debt paid in blood. The murderer, he suspected, was not merely after wealth, but revenge. As dessert was served, a crash echoed from upstairs. The guests froze, and Poirot sprang to his feet. "Remain here," he commanded, racing toward the sound. In the library, a window was shattered, and a singed smell lingered. A book lay open on the floor, its pages charred but legible, revealing a map of the estate with a circled location. "The chapel." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The Scarlet Key," he murmured. The vault had given him the past. The chapel, he sensed, held the future. He secured the documents in his room, locking them in his valise, and resolved to visit the chapel at dawn. The chapter of the vault was closed, but the hunt was far from over. Chapter 10. The betrayer's mask. There in St. Aldwyn's carried a chill that seemed to seep into the very stones of Blackthorn Manor, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Hercule Poirot, his grey cells humming with the weight of accumulated clues, stood in the manor's grand library, his eyes tracing the towering shelves of leather-bound tomes. The room, with its heavy oak paneling and the faint scent of aged paper, felt like a stage set for a revelation or a confrontation. The events of the past days, the murder, the stolen sapphire brooch, the coded diary, and the shadowy figure in the churchyard had woven a tapestry of intrigue that Poirot was determined to unravel. Tonight, he sensed, the threads would tighten. The library was dimly lit, the flickering glow of a single chandelier casting long shadows across the room. Poirot's polished shoes clicked softly on the parquet floor as he paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably trimmed. Despite the late hour, the Langley family, Eleanor, Victor, and their cousin Beatrice had retired to their rooms after a tense dinner, their faces etched with unease. Mr. Harrow, the enigmatic historian-turned-investigator, had lingered longer than the others, his eyes darting nervously as he excused himself. Poirot had noted the tremor in Harrow's hand as he set down his wine glass, a telltale sign of a man burdened by secrets. The discovery of the vault beneath the manor, with its damning documents about a disowned Langley sibling, had shifted the investigation's focus. The papers hinted at a stolen fortune, a scandal buried deep in the family's past. Eleanor's guarded confession about knowing of this sibling had only deepened the mystery, and Poirot's intuition whispered that the answer lay not in the vault's cold stone walls, but in the living hearts that beat within Blackthorn Manor. As the clock in the hall struck 11, a faint creak echoed from the corridor beyond the library. Poirot froze, his senses sharp. He had anticipated something like this, a move in the dark, a step too bold. The library was no random choice for his vigil. It was the heart of the manor, where secrets seemed to converge. The hidden passage behind the bookshelf, discovered in Chapter 2, had already proven the manor's walls held more than they revealed. Now, Poirot suspected, someone was about to test his resolve. He extinguished the chandelier, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the tall windows. Positioning himself behind a heavy velvet curtain, he waited, his breath steady, his mind a steel trap. The creak came again, closer now, followed by the soft scrape of a door being eased open. A figure slipped into the library, cloaked in black, their movements swift but cautious. The intruder carried a small lantern, its hooded light casting a narrow beam that danced across the shelves. Poirot's eyes narrowed as the figure moved toward the far end of the library, where a portrait of Sir Reginald Langley, the family patriarch, hung above a marble fireplace. The intruder's gloved hands reached up, fumbling with the frame. A soft click sounded, and the portrait swung outward, revealing a concealed compartment. Poirot's heart quickened not at the discovery of another secret, but at the audacity of the act. This was no mere thief. This was someone who knew the manor's hidden veins. The figure withdrew a bundle of papers from the compartment, but as they turned to leave, their lantern caught the edge of a table, knocking a brass candlestick to the floor with a resounding clang. The noise shattered the silence, and the figure froze, their head whipping around. Poirot seized the moment. Stepping from behind the curtain, he flicked on a pocket torch, its beam pinning the intruder in place. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm but laced with steel, "it is most unwise to disturb the repose of Hercule Poirot." The figure flinched, their face obscured by a black scarf wrapped tightly across the lower half. But the eyes wide, glittering with panic, betrayed a familiarity that Poirot could not yet place. The intruder bolted toward the hidden passage behind the bookshelf, but Poirot was prepared. He had rigged a simple mechanism earlier that evening, a taut wire across the passage's entrance. The figure stumbled, the lantern clattering to the ground, its light snuffed out. In the ensuing scuffle, Poirot darted forward, his agility surprising for a man of his stature. He grasped the intruder's cloak, but they twisted free, leaving the fabric in his hands. The scarf, however, had slipped, revealing a glimpse of a sharp jawline and a lock of dark hair. The figure vanished into the passage, the bookshelf sliding shut with a dull thud. Poirot stood in the darkness, clutching the cloak, his mind racing. The papers the intruder had sought were now scattered across the floor, and he knelt to examine them. They were letters, their edges singed as if someone had once tried to burn them. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and the content chilling, a blackmail demand, addressed to none other than Mr. Harrow. The letters detailed his investigation into the Langley family, accusing him of concealing evidence of a crime for profit. The signature was a single initial, V. Victor Langley. The name pulsed in Poirot's mind like a warning bell. The arrogant heir, with his polished charm and veiled hostility, had been a suspect from the start. But this was proof of something darker, a web of coercion that stretched beyond the murder of the anonymous letter writer. Poirot tucked the letters into his coat, his resolve hardening. The intruder's identity remained elusive, but the letters pointed to Victor as the puppet master, or so it seemed. The next morning, the manor buzzed with unease. Breakfast was a strained affair, the clink of cutlery against porcelain the only sound as the Langleys avoided each other's gazes. Poirot, seated at the head of the table at Eleanor's insistence, observed them with the precision of a watchmaker. Eleanor's hands trembled as she poured tea, her eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. Beatrice, usually composed, toyed with her napkin, her expression distant. Victor, however, was the picture of calm, his smile almost mocking as he complimented the cook on the scones. Monsieur Victor, Poirot said, breaking the silence, you slept well, I trust. Victor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. As well as one can in this draughty old place, he replied, his tone light. And you, Monsieur Poirot, the manor's ghost didn't keep you awake. Poirot's mustache twitched. The ghosts, they are silent. It is the living who make the most noise in the night. A flicker of unease crossed Victor's face, but he recovered quickly, raising his teacup in a mock toast. Beatrice coughed softly, drawing Poirot's attention. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw a plea their fear, perhaps, or a warning. Eleanor, meanwhile, excused herself abruptly, muttering about a headache. Poirot resolved to confront Mr. Harrow before the day grew older. He found the man in the garden, pacing near a rose arbor, his hat pulled low. Harrow's face paled as Poirot approached, the singed letters held prominently in his hand. Monsieur Harrow, Poirot began, his voice low, you have been less than candid with Hercule Poirot. These letters suggest you are not merely an investigator, but a man entangled in a dangerous game. Harrow's shoulders slumped, his bravado crumbling. I didn't want this, he said, his voice hoarse. I was hired to find the missing Langley relative. Yes, but then Victor he came to me with threats. Said he'd ruin me if I didn't keep quiet about what I found. He knew things about my past, debts I couldn't pay. I had no choice, and what did you find, mon ami? Poirot pressed, his eyes piercing. Harrow hesitated, glancing around as if the roses themselves might betray him. The disowned sibling Beatrice's mother was no thief, as the family claimed. She was framed, cast out to protect someone else's crime. Victor's father, Reginald, orchestrated it? There's proof in those letters, proof Victor wanted buried. Poirot nodded, his mind piecing together the puzzle. And last night, monsieur, were you in the library, seeking these letters? Harrow's eyes widened. No, I swear it. I was in my room, writing to my employer. I heard noises, but I didn't dare leave. Poirot studied him, weighing truth against deception. Harrow's fear seemed genuine, but Poirot had learned long ago that fear could mask guilt as easily as innocence. Very well, he said at last, but you will remain here, under my watch. The truth, it will not hide forever. As Harrow retreated, Poirot turned his attention to the cloak in his study. The fabric was fine, tailored, with a faint scent of lavender clinging to it. A woman's cloak, perhaps, but the manor's staff and guests blurred the lines of suspicion. Beatrice's nervous demeanor at breakfast lingered in his mind, as did Eleanor's abrupt departure, and yet, Victor's name on the letters burned brightest. The day passed in a flurry of subtle inquiries. Poirot interviewed the manor's butler, a stoic man named Grayson, who admitted to seeing a cloaked figure near the library the previous night but claimed ignorance of their identity. The groundskeeper, still shaken from the vanishing footprint incident, reported a broken lock on the chapel gate, suggesting someone had been prowling the estate's outer reaches. Each clue tightened the net, but the masked figure remained a shadow. That evening, Poirot devised a trap. He announced to the household that he had uncovered vital evidence in the library and would reveal it at midnight. The bait was simple: curiosity, fear, or greed would draw the culprit back. He enlisted Grayson to watch the main doors, while he positioned himself once more behind the library's curtain, a decoy stack of papers placed conspicuously on the table. As midnight approached, the manor grew silent, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl. Poirot's torch was at the ready, his senses attuned to the slightest disturbance. At precisely 12, the bookshelf creaked open, and the cloaked figure returned, their movements more desperate than before. They reached for the decoy papers, unaware of Poirot's presence. This time, Poirot was swifter. He sprang forward, seizing the figure's wrist before they could flee. The scarf fell away, revealing not Victor, nor Beatrice, nor Eleanor but Grayson, the butler, his face contorted with rage. "You!" Poirot exclaimed, his grip unyielding. "The loyal servant, gnawing. What game do you play, Monsieur Grayson?" Grayson struggled, but Poirot's strength held. "You don't understand," Grayson spat. "Victor forced me, said he'd expose my sister's debts if I didn't help him. I was to destroy those letters, keep his secrets safe. And the murder?" Poirot demanded, his voice like a blade. "Not me," Grayson gasped. "Victor planned it all, the letter writer, the poison, the brooch. I only followed orders." Poirot's mind raced. Grayson's confession confirmed Victor's role as the mastermind, but the butler's involvement added a new layer. Had Grayson acted alone in the library, or was he covering for another? The singed letters, the blackmail, the masked figure all pointed to Victor, but Poirot sensed a deeper truth lurking. He released Grayson, ordering him to remain in the library under guard by a trusted footman. The night was not over, and Poirot's trap had only half sprung. He returned to the hidden passage, examining it with fresh eyes. A faint scratch on the wall caught his attention, a mark that matched the torn glove from the churchyard. Beatrice's crest, Victor's schemes, Grayson's betrayal. The pieces were aligning, but the final picture remained obscured. As dawn broke, Poirot stood in the library, the singed letters spread before him. Victor's guilt was clear, but the masked figure's desperation suggested another player, one who feared exposure as much as Victor did. Poirot's plan was set, a confrontation with the entire household, where the truth would be forced into the light. The chapter closed with Poirot confident in his strategy, the trap poised to catch not just the betrayer, but the heart of the manor's darkness. Chapter 11. The scarlet key there in St. Aldwyn's carried a crisp bite, the kind that sharpened the senses and quickened the pulse. Hercule Poirot stood before the weathered oak door of the village's forgotten chapel, a squat stone structure, nestled at the edge of the churchyard, half swallowed by ivy and neglect. The fog that had cloaked the village for days had retreated, leaving a pale autumn sun to cast long shadows across the uneven ground. In Poirot's gloved hand gleamed the scarlet key, its intricate filigree catching the light like a blooded promise he had found it that morning, hidden in a hollowed-out hymnal in the manor's library. After hours of piecing together clues from the coded diary and the singed letter recovered from the masked intruder's failed arson attempt, the key, he was certain, was the linchpin to unraveling the mystery of Blackthorn Manor and the murder that had drawn him here. The chapel's door groaned as he turned the key, the lock yielding with a reluctant click. Inside, The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and ancient wax. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the crack-stained glass windows, depicting saints with faces worn to ghostly smudges. Poirot's polished shoes echoed on the stone floor as he stepped inside, his cane tapping a measured rhythm. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the shadowed interior, a splintered pew, a toppled candelabrum, and an altar draped in a moth-eaten cloth. This was no place of worship now, but a vault of secrets, and Poirot's little gray cells thrummed with anticipation. The past days had been a whirlwind of revelations. The dead man in the churchyard, identified as Reginald Langley, disgraced cousin of the family, had sent the anonymous letter summoning Poirot to St. Aldwain's. His murder, staged to look like a random act, was tied to the Langley family's tangled history: a missing sapphire brooch, a disowned sibling, and a fortune built on whispered betrayals. Poirot had navigated the suspicions of Eleanor, Victor, and Beatrice, the Langley heirs, each hiding their own motives. The coded diary had led him to a midnight rendezvous, the stolen brooch had pointed to an inside job, and the masked figure's attempt to burn the library had revealed a blackmail scheme involving Mr. Harrow, the enigmatic private investigator. Now, the scarlet key promised to unlock the final piece of the puzzle, the truth about Beatrice's mother, the disowned Langley sibling whose legacy had sparked this deadly game. Poirot approached the altar, his gaze drawn to a small iron box, tucked beneath the cloth, its surface etched with the Serpentandro's crest of the Langleys. The key fit perfectly, and with a soft clank, the lid sprang open. Inside lay a bundle of letters, yellowed with age, bound by a faded ribbon. He untied them with care, his fingers deft despite the chill seeping through his gloves. The letters were written in a delicate hand, addressed to my dearest Beatrice, and signed Clara Langley. Poirot's heart quickened. Clara, the disowned sister, was Beatrice's mother, a fact Beatrice had hinted at but never confirmed. The letters spoke of exile, a stolen fortune, and a vow to reclaim what was hers. One passage stood out: "The sapphire is not just a jewel, but a key to our redemption. Guard it, my child, and beware the traitor within our blood." Poirot's mustache twitched. The sapphire brooch, then, was more than a family heirloom. It was a symbol of Clara's claim to the Langley fortune, a claim that threatened the current heirs. Beatrice's secretive behavior, her nervous glances, her locket with Clara's photograph all pointed to her protecting this legacy. But who had killed Reginald to silence him? And why had the brooch been stolen, only to resurface in a pawn shop? Poirot tucked the letters into his coat, his mind racing. The chapel held no more answers, but it had given him the thread he needed to confront Beatrice and, he suspected, to unmask the mastermind behind the murder. He stepped outside, locking the chapel door behind him. The village was stirring now, with villagers bustling toward the market square for the weekly fair. Poirot made his way to Blackthorn Manor, his thoughts a kaleidoscope of clues. Beatrice was the key, but not the killer. He was certain of that. Her fear was genuine, her loyalty to her mother's memory unwavering. The true culprit was someone who stood to lose everything if Clara's claim resurfaced. Victor, with his charming facade and restless ambition, was a likely candidate, but Poirot needed proof. At the manor, the butler, Mr. Grayson, greeted him with his usual stoic demeanor. "Miss Beatrice is in the conservatory, sir," he said, his eyes flickering with something like unease. "She's been there since dawn, tending to the orchids." Poirot nodded, noting the butler's hesitation. "Merci, Mr. Grayson, and the others, Mademoiselle Eleanor and Monsieur Victor. Miss Eleanor is in the study, reviewing accounts. Mr. Victor is indisposed. A late night, I believe." Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Indisposed, you say? Most interesting. I shall begin with Mademoiselle Beatrice." The conservatory was a glass-domed oasis, humid and fragrant with exotic blooms. Beatrice stood at a workbench, her pale hands pruning a vibrant orchid, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She looked up as Poirot entered, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Mr. Poirot," she said, setting down her shears. I didn't expect you so early. Time, mademoiselle, is a luxury we cannot afford in matters of murder, Poirot replied, his voice gentle but firm. I have found something that concerns you. Letters, written by your mother, Clara Langley, Beatrice's. Face drained of color, she gripped the workbench, her knuckles whitening. You found them, where? In the chapel, locked in a box that required a scarlet key. You knew of this, did you not? She sank onto a stool, her breath uneven. I suspected. Mother spoke of a box, a place where she hid the truth about her banishment. She was cast out by her father for marrying against his wishes. The sapphire brooch was her dowry, her only claim to the Langley name. When it was stolen, she believed it was her brother, my uncle, who took it to erase her from the family. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And Reginald Langley, the man found dead in the churchyard, he was investigating this, Nong. Beatrice nodded, tears brimming. He was my mother's cousin, a scholar who believed in her cause. He wrote to me, saying he found proof of her inheritance. I begged him to be careful, but he was killed before he could tell me more. Poirot leaned forward, his voice softening. Mademoiselle, you have carried a heavy burden, but you must tell me, did you suspect Victor or Eleanor of his murder? Her gaze dropped to the floor. Victor, he's always been greedy, obsessed with the estate. Eleanor is cold, but she wouldn't kill. Victor, he's changed since Father died. He's secretive, always slipping away at night. Poirot's mind clicked like a well-oiled lock. Victor's absence during the brooch's theft, his nervous laughter at the mention of the heirloom, the ledger found in his room, hinting at financial troubles, it all pointed to a man desperate to secure his inheritance. But desperation alone did not make a murderer. Poirot needed evidence, and he had a plan to draw it out. Merci, mademoiselle, he said, rising. You have been most helpful. Rest assured, Hercule Poirot will bring the truth to light. He left the conservatory, his cane tapping a purposeful rhythm. The manor's corridors were a labyrinth of oak and shadow, each portrait on the walls seeming to watch him pass. He sought out Eleanor next, finding her in the study, poring over a ledger with a furrowed brow. Her auburn hair, so like Beatrice's, was pinned tightly, and her gray eyes flicked up as he entered. Mr. Poirot, she said, her tone clipped. I trust you're not here to waste my time with more nonsense about curses and brooches. Non, mademoiselle, Poirot replied, seating himself across from her. I am here to discuss your brother, Victor, and the matter of a certain ledger that suggests he has been less than prudent with the family's finances. Eleanor's pen froze mid-stroke. What are you implying? I imply nothing. I observe. The ledger in Victor's room shows debts, significant ones. Debts that might drive a man to extreme measures, such as theft or murder. Her lips tightened. Victor is reckless. Yes, but he's no killer. If you must know, I've been covering his debts to keep the estate intact. Father's death left us vulnerable, and Victor's gambling hasn't helped. Poirot's mustache twitched. And yet, you sold the sapphire brooch to a pawnshop to cover these debts, perhaps. Eleanor's face flushed. How did you? Yes, I sold it. It was a relic, a reminder of our family's failures. I needed the money to keep us afloat, but I didn't kill anyone. Mr. Poirot, I believe you, mademoiselle, Poirot said, though his eyes gleamed with calculation. But someone did, and I intend to find them. He left the study, his mind a whirl of connections. Eleanor's confession about the brooch was a piece of the puzzle, but it exonerated her from murder. She had no motive to kill Reginald, who threatened Victor's inheritance, not hers. Victor, however, was another matter. His debts, his secrecy, his absence during key moments all pointed to guilt, but Poirot needed more than suspicion. He needed proof, and he knew just where to look. That evening, he devised a trap. He sent word to Victor, via Mr. Grayson, that a crucial piece of evidence had been found in the manor's west wing. A lie. but one designed to draw Victor out. Poirot positioned himself in the library, hidden behind a heavy curtain, his watch ticking. Softly in the silence, the west wing was where the hidden passage had been discovered, a passage Victor likely knew well. If he was the killer, he would come to destroy the evidence. Hours passed, the manor settling into an uneasy quiet, then a soft creak of floorboard. In the hall, Poirot's breath stilled as a figure slipped into the library, a lantern casting flickering shadows. It was Victor, his face pale, his eyes darting. He moved to a bookshelf, pressing a hidden panel that opened the passage. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "Monsieur Victor, you are most predictable." Victor spun, the lantern nearly slipping from his hand. "Poirot, what the devil are you doing here?" "I am catching a murderer, monsieur." "You killed Reginald Langley to silence his claim to the fortune, did you not, and you stole the sapphire?" "Brooch to ensure your sister's inheritance remained unchallenged." Victor's laugh was strained. "You're mad. I've done no such thing." "Then why, pray, are you creeping through hidden passages at midnight?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The ledger in your room, your debts, your absence during the theft all point to you. And I suspect, in that passage, we will find the weapon that killed Reginald." Victor's face twisted, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might bolt. But then, a new voice cut through the tension, a woman's, sharp and commanding. "Enough, Victor. It's over." Eleanor stepped into the library, her expression a mix of fury and resignation. "Mr. Poirot, you're wrong about one thing. Victor didn't kill Reginald." "I did." Poirot's eyebrow arched. "Mademoiselle." "This is most unexpected. Explain." Eleanor's shoulders sagged, but her voice was steady. "Reginald came to me, demanding his share of the estate. He had proof those letters from Clara. I couldn't let him ruin us. Victor's debts had already bled us dry. I lured Reginald to the churchyard, used a blade from the manor's collection. I didn't mean to, but I panicked." Victor stared at her, horrified. "Eleanor, no. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're weak, Victor." She snapped. "You'd have crumbled." "I did what I had to for the family." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "Mademoiselle, you have confessed to murder. The truth is revealed, but at a great cost. The police will be informed." Eleanor nodded, tears in her eyes. "Do what you must, Mr. Poirot. I'm tired of running." The chapter closed with Poirot escorting Eleanor to her room, where she would await the authorities. Victor, shaken, followed in silence. The scarlet key had unlocked the truth, but not the one Poirot had expected. Beatrice's mother was avenged, the Brooch's mystery resolved, but the cost was a family fractured beyond repair. As dawn broke over St. Aldwyn's, Poirot stood at the manor's gates, the letters in his pocket, ready to face the final reckoning with Victor's role in the affair. The truth, as always, had emerged from the shadows, but it left a bitter taste.